Hello and welcome to Fiddler's Green Podcast number 4. What time is it? So, thank you all for joining me on this November evening. As you noticed, I've been able to keep these podcasts much more regular than I usually have. In the past, I think I've done them more or less when the mood struck me or when I had gotten finished with a writing project. Many times my idea was that I wanted to alternate releasing an essay and releasing a podcast. And obviously, since the essays get delayed a lot and the podcasts are much easier to make, this means I just push the podcast out so that it's more or less once a month. But the idea is, and what I really want to do with this channel is to turn it more and to turn it more into a regular thing, to kind of make a community around regularity and to kind of provide to the people who are listening something of value. Now, I don't necessarily want to sacrifice quality, but at the same time, I'm gonna have to deal with the fact that not every time am I going to have a vast, sprawling essay of things to talk about. But given that it's me, I might indeed have a vast, sprawling number of things to talk about. I doubt I could keep it under 3 hours, but maybe it would be better to shoot for more of an hour and a half lecture than a 2 hour lecture. Some people have said that the lectures are a little bit too long, but the the thing is with all of these things, I'm still experimenting. This is a new room, obviously. I want to get some more sound insulation so that it sounds a little bit more cozy and not like I'm just echoing off the ceilings like you hear right now. But nevertheless, that's the plans for the channel. Oh, and one other thing is I'm going to start another podcast on top of this one. I haven't quite figured out how we're going to store this. It will probably be through Substack, X, and maybe what is the podcast app? I don't really listen to podcasts. Oh, the Spotify, I think. I don't know. But the idea of this is going to be to not talk about politics, but rather talk about practical community building and practical cultural creation and invite a lot of people on, a lot of diverse voices on. So we can start talking about how to practically implement some of the things that we talk about on this channel. One thing that really frustrates me about the political environment and internet politics generally is the incredible circular nature of the entire affair. This is something that me and Aaron McIntyre have had different opinions on for a very long time. Aaron's good friend, great content creator, brilliant meme artist, but Aaron is very comfortable saying the same thing over and over again. Well, myself, on the other hand, I get very self conscious when I start saying the same thing over and over again, unless I'm specifically think that it's some kind of eternal truth. So, the regular thing like discourse is dead. That's not an eternal truth. That is a news item. It is an event that happened in the last 2 years. And every time I talk about it, I want to stab myself because I feel like I'm wasting your time and I'm wasting my time. And it feels like there's an enormous amount of futility. And that's not really the point of any of this. People enjoy the show, and I want to provide them with a pleasant hour and a half to 2 hour lecture and then conversation, hopefully exploring something in a way that we actually learn a new thing. Mostly the conversations on this podcast, Fiddler's Green Podcast, are going to be the events of the previous 2 weeks with what I think we can take from them or what I think we can learn from them. And in the process, I'm going to be glossing over a lot of stuff that I don't think is particularly relevant. But I think that it's always really important that I come to some kind of organic conclusion that is not a repetition of the same 15 things that I usually say on this channel. Because I don't, is that organic? I guess it is to a certain extent. To a certain extent, you always have the same points that you kind of live your life by and your main attitudes towards the modern state. When you look at the news on a daily basis, you're not developing new ideas, you're more or less rehashing old ones. But, that's, this is what you're really getting in this podcast is you're getting kind of the brainstorm of my more solid ideas, hopefully, which appear in more fluent and more incisive form, and ironically, I have more verbose form on in my essays on Substack. The time for doing essays on YouTube, regrettably, is over. I might do one in the future, but that's all it is. I really wish we were back in the YouTube essay era, but that would require an active amount of discourse. So, I guess, before we get onto the news, the thing that I've been up to this last week has been, largely dealing with the new event. It's not a new event. This is the second one we put on, but the Cascadia Frontier Society up in Oregon and Washington has a yearly fall conference. It's smaller than the one that the OGC runs, but it's really good. And I went down there and hung out with a lot of the regulars. It was amazing. I had free childcare for the first time in a very long time for a weekend, and take advantage of that. Go up to Portland, a lot of driving. But it's interesting because when you talk to people in real life, you realize that almost everyone's kind of on the same page about what we should be doing. And this was obviously one of the inspirations for starting this new podcast. That's kind of an extension from my monthly weaving stream. We talk about practical things and things we can do. I'm not going to talk about the conference itself and the speakers. I might mention them in passing here, but I'll reserve that for the first one of our podcasts, which will probably premiere on Sunday. But it is amazing because everyone's trying to break out of cycles. That's kind of the genuine feeling among most people is we have an opportunity to build things. We have an opportunity to take steps forward. What can we do with organization? What can we do with production? And I think it's a white pill. It's a white pill for people who love black pills, like myself, always taking the black pills. But it's something that it's really encouraging to see people in this space take that new attitude. But I guess the other thing that went on, not necessarily in my life, but in the internet, which is obviously the immediate equal and opposite reaction, the kind of positive spirit you saw at the conference, was the great conservative meltdown of 2025. We were like on the fourth or fifth iteration of this absolutely insane news item. This has just been happening for 2 or 3 years. It's essentially been happening since Trump walked onto the scene in 2015. But there's just this inability of the conservative movement to understand what's going on. And maybe they do. I don't exactly know how much of this is them not getting it versus how much of them is them essentially following the donor money. Because the donor money is going in a certain direction and the zeitgeist is going in the completely opposite direction. And, this is what they say about people who are short-sighted. You follow the money. When power goes in the opposite direction, you're going to lose. The controversy started with the infamous Nick Fuentes Tucker Carlson interview. And what's so funny is that the interview was pretty boring, actually. If I'm going to be honest, I think I got through it eventually, but it was just the stupidest shit ever. It was rehashes of all the things we had seen before on Nick Fuentes, the typical Tucker reconciliation, his attempt to kind of push a little bit more of a moderate point of view. It could have put anyone to sleep. But of course, for Con Inc., this was just the greatest disaster of all time. We have to punish Tucker Carlson. We have to get him out of the right. You'll never work in conservative town again. I'm in the process of writing a response to Rod Dreher on the Substack, which will have kind of the talking points against the conservative and post-conservative establishment positions on this. But this is, what's more remarkable about the conservative Civil War is just the absolute cluelessness of one side of it. It's just someone hitting their head against a concrete wall. They're threatening to cancel Tucker. You can't cancel Tucker, guys. You already canceled Tucker. You have no leverage on him. The only leverage you might have is to go to the social media algorithms, which you don't own. And nor will a giant campaign to recensor social media go over well with your base. They're going to eventually wonder what the hell you're doing, because most of your base, although they're not on board with Nick Fuentes, is also not on board with canceling or spending a significant amount of resources to try to cancel Tucker Carlson. We need to exclude Nick Fuentes. You already tried to exclude Nick Fuentes, and you failed. You failed to exclude Trump. You failed to exclude Nick Fuentes. You no longer have the power to gatekeep. You no longer have the power to pull the puppet strings. And I mean, I don't know. I think do they not realize this? Are they so clueless and backwards that they don't understand the dynamic that has played out over the last 10 years and how their own political movement has changed in the wake of that? Did they need me to review what happened with Trump? Did they need me to review what happened with Tucker Carlson? Did they need me to review what happened to any number of figures? Did they think that they were on the winning side of the woke right controversy with James Lindsay? I mean, this is a great example of this. And this is one reason why paying for political punditry in highly unstable times never really makes sense. It's a fool's errand to use power in this way. In highly stable times, in times where there is a controlled information flow, say, to reduce controversy, let's say that we restrict ourselves to the late antiquity, or I should say the early modern period, the period of the Reformation. Now, the Catholic Church's approach to heresy in the Middle Ages, in sort of the very early modern period, or the very late antiquarian period, however you want to imagine that, the period of very early Christian Europe, its response to heresy and bad ideas was essentially a strategy of containment. They had ultimate control over what books were published, who managed the libraries, who got to say what. And when there was a bad idea, like the Cathar heresy, which was the Cathar heresy was certainly a bad idea. Comparisons to Gnosticism are overused. It's almost a cliche among Catholics to call their enemies Gnostic. But the Cathar heresy was very much a reiteration of the over-idealistic mistake that is a tendency in human spirituality, particularly in the spirituality that's influenced by Platonism, which was sort of the de facto dominant philosophical school that operated on top of Christianity in that period. The Cathar heresy was suppressed militaristically, and then it was suppressed through the Catholic Church's ability to control information. And, that worked very well for them because the Middle Ages were a period of incredible stability, at least ideologically speaking. Fast forward to the period of the Reformation, and these circumstances no longer apply. The Catholic Church thinks that it can essentially quash all external debate. Like they understand, the Catholic Church understands what problem it has. It's not unaware of the problems that Martin Luther is pointed out, at least insofar as it applies to the corruption of the sacraments, at least as it applies to the fraudulency of certain relics, at least as it applies to the poor behavior of certain Catholic leaders. This has always been a problem. There were times in the previous centuries where there had been popes and anti-popes that had fought a kind of ecclesiastical civil war under the noses of the European kings. But the Catholic Church thinks in the early 16th century that it can suppress the debate on the outside. It only needs to worry about the debates that it holds in its inner sanctums, in its official debates that are moderated by Catholic Church officials, and that the rest of all of these peasants that are following Martin Luther, they can just be suppressed or cut off or excommunicated, and then the political support will drain away from them the way it did in the Cathar Crusades. Uh, Obviously, this was just not the case. The Catholic Church did need to have this debate out in the open because that's where the debate was happening. It no longer held the key, ironically enough, it no longer held the keys to the gate of debate in this way. And it's not like the Catholic Church didn't have answers. It's not like the Catholic doctrine had to be absolutely modified or put in a box, and or we're just going to pack up. There's no legitimate counter arguments to Martin Luther's theses. There's no way to reform. We just got to go to this. Everyone reads the Bible and figures it out for themselves, which I know Martin Luther eventually doesn't settle on that idea, but the movement that he starts in this period kind of does go in that direction to a certain degree. But by the time the Catholic Church realizes its mistake and decides to have a genuine answer to the Reformation, the Council, it's like 100 years later. It's 80 years too late, or maybe like 50 years too late. It's decades too late at this stage. And the horse has already run out of the barn. And this is more or less the problem you're dealing with the conservative movement. You don't control the gate. You can't censor Carlson. You can't censor Fuentes. And it's not like what you're trying to censor is some kind of particularly bad behavior on the part of Fuentes. That's also incredibly easy to say for anyone who's reasonably educated, for anyone who's reasonably aware of the conversations that are going on online. They can see that the problem isn't that Nick Fuentes is an asshole. Now, Nick Fuentes is a brilliant man, but he's also an asshole. But that's not why you're trying to exclude him. The right wing has parlayed with many assholes in its very, very long and not so illustrious history. You're not trying to censor Nick Fuentes because he's an asshole. You're not trying to censor Nick Fuentes because he's an actual Nazi. He's obviously not a real Nazi. This is a kayfabe. Come on, guys. This is obvious. You're trying to censor Nick Fuentes because you do not want to have certain conversations about any number of things, but specifically having to do with the identity of certain Western countries, or all Western countries for that matter. You don't want to have to answer questions about race. You don't want to have to answer questions about religion. You don't want to have to answer questions about neoliberalism. You don't want to have to answer questions about proceduralism, all of which Nick Fuentes calls into question, in addition to the question over Israel, which it's ironic enough because I'm not somebody who actually cares about Israel in terms of who rules Palestine. I think it has to be ruled as an imperial province and split up into a patchwork, ruled by some kind of king, hopefully a Christian one, so that they can keep the Muslims and the Jews on their separate plots and not wielding political power over each other. I think that as long as the Middle East is a political engine, it will lead to a continuous set of escalating cosmic wars, which is obviously what has happened since Israel has become a country. I don't think Israel is a feasible problem either for Ashkenazi Jews' desire to make an ethno-state for themselves. Another insane idea. I mean, it's not an insane idea. I mean, I understand the inclination. Everyone does at this stage. Everyone understands that people want to have their own space where they can be the political majority, where they don't have to contest for power as a political minority. But I mean, maybe conservatives don't understand that. Apparently, conservatives don't understand that. But this is the problem, and I don't really care ultimately how much of Palestine is siphoned off to the Jewish patchworks and how much of Palestine is siphoned off to the Muslim patchworks. Now, obviously, the holy sites would have to be administrated neutrally by the third party in question here. But that's not my immediate political concern as a native of North America and as a Gentile Catholic. But for some reason, kind of obviously, Israel exposes every single hypocrisy about the modern right because it shows how every one of the ideas they hold up as essential and indispensable to the conservative cause are immediately dropped the second they come to identity politics they actually care about. I don't even know where to begin with this. It's so obvious that this is the case. We've been through it so many times about the differential attitude that conservatives have to Israel versus the attitudes that they take to the United States or Germany or any other country that has a particular ethnic or racial or religious character. And it's not even necessarily religion. I have on the screen here kind of this extremely ugly man, Dinesh D'Souza. I wonder if I don't know if I've ever been a fan of Dinesh D'Souza. I don't think I really have. I know that a friend gave me his book when I was an undergrad in college and kind of in my libertarian phase. I was a Democrat voting libertarian that, I don't know, I might have even been a market socialist if I was going by the types of political categories that BreadTube holds open for itself. But this is, I read Dinesh's book and it felt pandering. It felt pandering. It felt like someone was telling me what I wanted to hear. There was no edge to it. And just as a form of contrast, it's not that like any conservative track that came out of this period. I remember having on my shelf Dinesh D'Souza's, I forget which one it was. It could have been Collected Essays. It could have been The End of Racism. But it was Dinesh D'Souza's book, which my friend had lent me. And then right next to it was a book that was seminal in my life. It didn't affect me at the time, but it was one of those books that I read it and I kept on coming back to it. And that was another collection of essays by Theodore Dalrymple called Our Culture, What's Left, or comma, What's Left of It. Brilliant book, brilliant essayist Theodore Dalrymple kind of single-handedly resurrected paleoconservatism during this time. And boy, did it need resurrecting, because guess who killed it? This is unbeknownst to me. I was aware of Sam Francis because I was an internet troll and I trolled the internet for radical opinions back in the day. And so I was aware of Sam Francis. He passed away when I was an undergraduate in college, I believe. But I learned only at the time that he passed away that it was Dinesh D'Souza that was critical to getting him fired and excluded from the National Review Circle. Now, this was not, Sam Francis was an accomplished figure. He was an accomplished and celebrated intellectual figure on the right wing, and somebody that had numerous allies. And at the same time, National Review and Dinesh D'Souza was able to just take him off the board regardless. And it was surprisingly effective. And immediately after Dinesh D'Souza takes Sam Francis off the board, he writes this book called The End of Racism, where he makes the Charles Murray case against affirmative action and against racial preferences and against racial grievance mongering, but with all of the kind of sober genetic dynamics that were alluded to or referenced inside Charles Murray's book. All those are taken out, right? It's sanitized for a boomer audience. And the thesis at the end of the racism was the conservative movement's response to this identity politics is just to be anti-identity politics. And, I kind of believed that at the time. I kind of believed that was possible. I was a big liberal. I was a big believer in this thing called individualism. I was also really into the atheism versus theism debates. I can't remember quite when I left the neo-atheist camp, but I remember leaving the new atheist camp and, well, that's not really relevant, I guess, because I think I left the new atheist camp, and then immediately after, Dinesh D'Souza jumped into the debate over theism versus anti-theism. I remember that because he was very much a Johnny-come-lately figure, and then he recast himself as this kind of a religious apologist for Christianity, one that could kind of throw a punch back at Christopher Hitchens. And it was kind of funny because at the same time, there was another Indian Christian called Ravi Zacharias, who was really prominent in evangelical circles as an apologist. And this is something that I remember kind of thinking that there was this maybe a resurgent Hindu Christianity or something like that. But Ravi Zacharias was later kind of exposed as being a hypocrite and a false teacher, if I remember properly. I don't want to scandal monger, but he was completely exposed as being a dishonest person. And Dinesh D'Souza, though, he kind of persisted. He kind of persisted as a conservative activist in the neocon fashion, making a movie, getting put in jail for it because it didn't clear the campaign contribution legality. And he got convicted for a felony. I don't think he stayed in jail for very long. But because you was running a movie that was paid for by non-approved political money, very close to a campaign, which is considered campaign reform violations. And so my response to Dinesh was kind of just to forget about him. But always in the back of my mind was he was the avatar for anti-identity politics. That was what put him on the map initially. The book, The End of Racism, the cancellation of Sam Francis, and the doubling down on this very specific form of kind of raw individualism that the conservative movement of the late 90s and early 2000s was so well known for. Well, really, the conservative movement post-Buckley was so well known for that. But then this week, right after trying to do a reiteration of his role with Sam Francis, but this time with Tucker Carlson, saying how we needed to exclude Tucker Carlson from the conservative movement, and this is not what we're about. We're all about individualism and pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. Just like any other number of these grifters that are going around, Vivek Ramaswamy too. You gotta pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. We have to be number one achieving best engineers. Meanwhile, you look into his actual background about how he got all of this money. It was basically a combination of nepotism and rug pulling, a pharmaceutical scam, buying up a pharmaceutically developed product, remarketing it, getting people to invest in it, and then having the product fail. And you net millions of dollars from doing that transaction. And that's the achievement of Vivek Ramaswamy. And from that point, it's just telling white boomers what they already want to hear. And we're supposed to celebrate him for this. We're supposed to let him lecture Americans about how they're not American enough. We're supposed to have Dinesh D'Souza lecture Americans about who they consider to be Americans as well. I mean, I guess Dinesh has a better claim to it. He's been was he born in the country? I don't know. Maybe he was born in Goa. I'm pretty sure he's Goan. But either way, maybe, Vivek is a questionable person. I never really trusted him. But Dinesh D'Souza has been on the scene for quite some time now. Maybe this person is the true avatar of individualism. Maybe he's the guy who really gosh darn believes in no identity politics, in just judging people as individuals. And then what happens? Well, and then, the outrage over Nick Fuentes and Tucker Carlson dies down for one day, and immediately the regular Twitter mudflinging starts up again, this time over the controversy of somebody who's doing a documentary about some of the more unsavory practices of Hinduism, of which there are many. Hinduism being the last pagan religion. Some admirable parts about Hinduism, mostly from the past, but there are a lot of unsavory ones. And this documentary filmmaker was doing a documentary film about a Hindu festival where people literally wallow in shit. It's a real thing. It goes on. And he's complaining, this guy, he's not in the conversation about Tucker Carlson. He's not in the conversation about Nick Fuentes. But nevertheless, he's complaining about how Indians are coming after him for making this documentary. And apropos of nothing, who shows up in the comments? Well, it's Mr. I Don't See Race himself, Dinesh D'Souza. Mr. It's all about the individual, Dinesh D'Souza. And what does he say? Oh man, he's coming to the defense of Indian Americans, saying the Indians are just so much smarter than regular American people. They just achieve so much more. And how dare you make this documentary of this actual disgusting religious phenomenon? I mean, look, this guy was Mr. Christianity 20 years ago during the atheism wars. This guy couldn't shut up about monotheism's benefit and preference over all other religions. What connection does he have to Hinduism? I mean, if there were, say, for instance, I'm German in the same way that Dinesh D'Souza is Indian. Let's say that in the in the Black Forest, which is nearby where my ancestors came from, in Ulm, let's say that in the Black Forest, like a bunch of pagan Germans got together and like dived around in cow shit or pig shit for like 2 hours, and someone made a documentary of that, making fun of Germans or the German government or whatever, or maybe German pagans. What would my reaction to that? But like, would I feel a need to come to the defense of that? I mean, it would take every fiber of will and restraint in my body not to immediately take that image of pagan Germans writhing around in pig shit and throw it right in the face of the pagans, of the pagan right wingers that I've been debating against. Like, oh, you want us to go back to this? You want us to go back to writhing around in shit? That's what I would do with it. Probably. I can't imagine in the wake of that, coming to some kind of like German supremacist position against Americans. I guess, I should be fair to Dinesh. I mean, there is sort of a racialized dimension to it. If I were to say, if for instance, I mean, I don't know, it might be different. Let's say, for instance, that some Indian documentary filmmaker was caught wind of this pagan German shit festival in the Black Forest. And he was using this as a demonstration for how all white people are like this. Okay, I can kind of see how I would defend that, but I'm pretty sure I wouldn't defend that by putting down Indians. I'm pretty sure I would defend that by saying that this is not something that Europeans generally do. This is something that a crazy subset of Europeans does. I don't know. I know you're not supposed to make the not all X are like that argument. I know that's a weak rhetorical position, but you know what's a lot more weak than the not all X are like that? Implying that you have collective loyalty to your race in opposition to your religion and in opposition to your native country and in opposition to your 20 years of promoting pure individualism. That's much less of a strong rhetorical position, Dinesh. And so now everyone is just, I don't know, I mean, there's boomers who don't get this. There are boomers who can't see the connections. But I mean, is there anybody who's advocating for this individualistic position that is not a major hypocrite? All the other people, from Glenn Beck to Ben Shapiro to Mark Levine, all of these other guys who are going on about how they can only see the individual and so on and so forth, are all slavish sycophants to our greatest ally in Israel. So suddenly, when we get to Israel, I guess we can see groups. I guess countries can have racial characters. I guess countries can have religious laws. I guess borders do matter. Man, that's not fair. A lot of them defend borders in the abstract. But nothing about Israel's actions make any sense unless you can see collectives and declare that certain countries have collective characters to them. And no one is taking this seriously. It's almost not worth arguing against. because it's just people making fools out of themselves. As I said before, Rod Dreher wrote a series of essays. And on my way back from the conference this month, I took it on myself. My wife did half of the driving. So I got about 5 hours on my way up to write my speech, and 5 hours on the way out. It's a 10-hour drive. 5 hours on the way back to write the beginning of this article. A little pressed for time, right? I was going to write a very angry Substack piece in response to Rod Dreher, who's I have a long history with. And the only reason why I'm writing that is because I do have a long history with Rod Dreher, who's one of the most influential people on my own intellectual journey. But I don't know what to say. I mean, like, are you a moron? Like, who's buying this? I genuinely want to talk to the person. I genuinely want to talk to the person who's buying this conservative line about not caring about groups, because nobody, I'm certainly no one under the age of 40. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm 40. I can say this. I can see what's wrong. I can see what's going on. No one under the age of 40 is actually buying into this. But that being said, what order do I want to do these things in? The other thing I think that was kind of interesting, and this has been a news item for a very long time, is kind of the Trump administration's stumbling over certain economic positions, over certain economic decisions it's been making. So the Trump administration is obviously a organization that it's filled with people that kind of know what time it is. They kind of are aware of what needs to be done. They're starting to realize how politics really works, but they're just not all there yet. And so what happens is that a lot of times you have economic policies that are totally half-baked and aren't really properly thought through yet. And there's been a number of them. There's been a number that have come from the Trump administration. There have been a number of them that have been floated by people who are associated with the Trump administration, like DeSantis, which, I guess people will say he's not part of the Trump administration, but he's in the group of kind of normie conservatives, and they're floating all of these policies. And these newer policies are things like get rid of the property tax. Oh boy, we all hate property taxes. I'm a homeowner now. I'm paying the property tax. I certainly hate the property tax. Or why don't we have like 50-year mortgages? Or why don't we expand the number of Chinese students that are coming over and working on STEM degrees inside American universities? Wow, what could go wrong? All of these ideas, I mean, we'll debate the merits of them. But and there's motivations behind them. There's a good idea standing behind this. You can see that there's a good idea standing behind it. Obviously, the STEM degrees earned at the university are driving GDP, and America needs that. It doesn't want its economy to collapse. Sure enough, right? We're very, very worried about economic growth because it appears like there might be a huge bubble in the economy that's about to burst. So there's that problem. Then there's the other issue. Pardon me, let's reset. You can see sort of like a kernel of truth in that kind of half-baked policy idea. Then there's, the problem with property taxes. People are taxed too much. That is very, very obvious. The middle class is getting taxed enormously. Property taxes might be a good idea to get rid of, but they're really not, right? That when you soberly examine the issue of property taxes, I know we all hate taxes. I certainly hate the property tax, being a homeowner now. But it is, of all the taxes you want to start getting rid of, that is the one you want to get rid of the last, because the property taxes are what feeds the housing market and allow young people to actually buy a home. If you get rid of property taxes, people will keep their homes forever, and they will never put them back on the market. They'll never downsize, and there will never be any available housing for young people. Furthermore, the property tax itself, the revenue generated by the property tax, usually it's a state property tax or a county property tax, that immediately gets put back into services that the community needs, like schools, like libraries, This is not taxes. This is not like the income tax. This does not go into a huge coffer where most of it goes off to pay the interest on national debt. If you get rid of the property taxes, immediately an enormous number of services are going to have solvency crises, specifically a lot of the services that young people need to thrive. But no, like we are boomers. We know that somehow we earned our houses. We don't have any obligation to the young at all. We just want to grab as many gumballs as possible and then tell them to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, just like my boy Dinesh and Ben Shapiro say, right? You can't have any collectivism here. You can't have any larger responsibility for community. So we got to get rid of the property taxes and tank our social services at the local level so that boomers can hang on to houses that they can't possibly live in. And that will be perfect. Brilliant. And to complement it, to throw the Zoomers a bone, we've got a little bit of a treat here. That treat is the new financial invention, the 50-year mortgage. Oh boy, the 50-year mortgage. Man, and look how low the yearly payments are on, or the monthly payments are on a 50-year mortgage. My God, it's less than paying rent. It still doesn't deal necessarily with the issue of putting money down on a 50-year mortgage. But the problem with the 50-year mortgage is that you will never pay off the house. You will never pay off the house as long as you keep it. You'll get a 50-year mortgage when you're 30, and you won't own the house till you're 80. And in the meantime, the banks are collecting more interest on your property, which means that now the middle class is offered an olive branch. But the olive branch, if you integrate it over a long enough time period, is just a proposal for the banks to own even more of the wealth of middle America than they did before. This is not how you want to deal with the housing crisis, guys. You want to deal with the housing crisis by decreasing the breakneck speed of immigration into this country, by increasing the housing supply, by creating jobs where people actually want to live, by helping relocation of jobs to those places. At some point, we'll have to do job creation programs in the light of the automation crisis. But either way, that's the only solution. And then also, dare I suggest it, make sure that property taxes are still a thing so that when people do end up in their 70s with 5-bedroom McMansions, they're incentivized to downsize and sell it to a family that actually wants to put kids in those rooms, as opposed to having those rooms collect dust with like Koopy dolls and yarn supplies forever. If you're in your 70s, you shouldn't have a 6-bedroom house. That isn't. I mean, I guess maybe if your kids are living with you, but what's the point of it? Look, fine. If you've saved, it's fine. And I understand that there's a need for intergenerational housing. Maybe there could be some way where the kids could take over from the parents, and the house could be passed down in the family. In which case, the way to solve that would be to loosen the taxes on interfamily gifts and loosen the taxes involved in inheritance. But I don't want boomers to sit on top of mansions inside areas that need to have houses to go to families as starter homes. That's absolutely nuts. And I also want to pay for critical social. So, I mean, am I a communist by saying this? I don't know. It doesn't even really matter. There's a conversation to be had here. There's two sides of this issue. I don't want to say that there isn't. And God knows I hate it when people have some deeply valuable ancestral home that they don't want to part with, that their grandfather built with his own two hands. And then they suffer a financial setback. They stumble onto hard times with a medical bill they can't afford, and now suddenly they have to sell this deeply valuable house that was in their family for generations to BlackRock in order to make ends meet. That's heartbreaking, and it's all because they couldn't afford the property taxes. Sure, I'm not saying that there is not two sides to this issue. But the proposals we're hearing about 50-year mortgages and no property taxes and 600 million or 600,000 Chinese STEM students being admitted, this is nuts. This is a boomer-brained idea of an America of infinite growth. It's got no relationship to the actual America that we live in. Which brings me to sort of the next thing that kind of happened. This is something that happened a little bit. It's not really a big deal. And I'm actually talking about this because it's not a big deal. Because wouldn't you know it? It's November. It's November. So you know what happens in November, guys, right? Every November and every May, like clockwork, for the last 3 years, somebody on the dissident right has to stand up and say, I denounce the dissident right. The dissident right is horrible. This could be the label they've used for themselves for 5 or 6 or 7 years. This could be the label that put their channel on the map. This could be the label that everyone associates them, and denouncing it won't make a difference. Nevertheless, every November, someone has to go, I denounce the dissident right. Now, of course, in this denouncement of the dissident right, no one will ever name names. No one will ever talk about, I guess, in this case, as opposed to the people who apostatized last year during November, this November, there are actual complaints. This year, who's it this year? This year it's academic agent. Next year it'll be somebody else, right? Academic agent and Todd Lewis denounced the dissident right. Who the hell is the dissident right? Who knows? They condemn a bunch of ideas that are just, they're boomer ideas. They're idiotic populist ideas. They're not intellectual positions. And what's the response supposed to be in this development? That's just, everyone was asking me to cover this issue. Oh, you got to cover academic agents moving away from the right. No. It's bullshit. It's not bullshit. I do respect academic agent Nima Pervini. He's a great thinker. But this, I don't know what possesses people to do this little performance. I'm telling you, it's like clockwork. It's always the label. At this point, everybody has denounced everybody else. And when everyone denounces everyone else, the denouncement is always targeted towards the dissident right. So it's like that Spider-Man meme. Like everyone points fingers and go, I denounce the dissident right. No, I denounce the dissident right. What's going on? Like Lauren Southern's coming back in the news. Is she going to denounce the dissident right for a 4th time? Is she going to come out with another story about how she was abused by a man for the 17th time? Oh my God, the 17th boyfriend I had consecutively while I was still in marriage didn't treat me right. It was probably something like date rape, even though I have no recollection. I didn't go to the police with it. Oh my God, I'm a victim. I denounce the dissident right. And the dissident right raped me. Yeah, that's exactly what we're going to hear. We're going to get a expose by Lauren Southern the next week. And the thing is that she went out on a date with the dissident right, and then the dissident right went to the hotel room, and then she got into bed with the dissident right, and the dissident right raped her, and then she's only coming forward to denounce the dissident right now because the dissident right abused her beyond all reason, and we all need to denounce the dissident right. The dissident right just exists at this point to be like the subject of denouncement. And it's funny because I think with the whole Todd Lewis thing, 2 years ago he was kind of critiquing me as well, and we did a live stream I think with the OGC and Charlemagne, and his criticism on that live stream was that I was not technophobic enough. And now this iteration, at least with Todd Lewis and Academic Agent, I think Academic Agent has been consistently somebody who's been more of a technocratic elitist. I mean, I wouldn't have called his ideology that anytime in the past, but he's always kind of been leaning more on that leg of the right wing than anything in the past. But Todd Lewis and Academic Agent now seem to be critiquing the distant right because it's not it's not technophiliac enough. Like, we don't love technology enough on the right. Like, we aren't building the massive AI data centers fast enough. That's the problem with the distant right. Previously, it was because I hadn't read enough Jack O'Lool. I was playing into the machine. I was still relying on all of this technology. Man, I should be a Mennonite and retreat to the woods and just totally eschew modernity in all its forms. And I was having the wool pulled over my head by Curtis Yarvin and this CEO technocratic dictator thing. That was the critique 2 years ago. And now the critique is, I don't like technocracy enough. Or, I'm sorry, did I say me? Well, Todd Lewis certainly has said that he's critiquing me. Academic Agent, not so much. Not that I think it matters one iota. But now it's the exact opposite. Now I do not love technocracy enough. Look, it's fine, guys. And Academic Agent, great videos. He had Caleb Maupin on, which is somebody I found a little bit interesting over the years. But I'll give a counter critique on this Academic Agent and Todd Lewis. This is all bullshit. You know this is bullshit. We both know this is bullshit. We both know that this is a part of the KFAB. This is where Hulk Hogan joins the New World Order and becomes the bad guy. You know, the fans get really excited. They come back and watch the channel again. You are not part of the left. You are not a centrist. This is not something you can be in the modern age. The only way you can be a centrist or part of the moderate left is if you fully endorse Zionism in Israel, if you're a centrist at least, whether you denounce all differences between groups and certainly biological differences, and if you fully embrace egalitarianism as a reigning moral order, right down to the Mill version of John Stuart Mill and the Veil of Ignorance, all of those great, that's how you get back into the left. If you're not on board with egalitarianism between groups, if you're not on board with atheism, if you're not on board with Zionism, you cannot, if you're not on board with egalitarianism, or like Mr. Grove said, right? Yeah, someone's saying it's kayfabe. You know, if you're not on board, it's not Mr. Grove, it was someone else. It's like you can't be on the left and not be totally down with sexual degeneracy and worship of African Americans. So Todd Lewis, are you totally down with gay sexual degeneracy and transgenderism? Are you totally down with worshiping African American culture, Academic Agent? 3 years ago, you were condemning all of America. All Americans are just totally negrified. But now you're on the left, now you're on the center. You cannot be on the modern center left without saying that African American culture is the pinnacle of humanity. That's just what it is. I mean, I was in Princeton, I was in New York, I'm in San Francisco. The same rules still apply. You're not going to get into those circles without saying these things. You're not going to. No one's going to forget. No one's going to forget that you're a wrong thinker. So, what are you going to do? You're going to get a speaking engagement. Someone's going to ask you one of these critical questions about race or about sexual identity, and then you're going to immediately fail your leftist and centrist bona fides. And that's the real world, right? That's what being a centrist or a leftist means in the real world. And so I know that Academic Agent and Todd Lewis don't support those things. So in the real world, regardless of how much they might hate the label, they are right-wingers. And in the real world, since they're not aligned to Ben Shapiro or Dinesh D'Souza, they are not part of the mainstream right wing. So being part of the right wing and not being part of the mainstream, that means that they are, by definition, drum roll please, they are part of the dissident right. The same dissident right that raped Lauren Southern, the same dissident right that drummed Alex Kashuta off of the internet and ruined her life, the same dissident right that caused boomers to like bad economic policy like 50 years mortgage, the same dissident right that caused my rose bush to wither, the same dissident right that caused me to get a cavity last year, the same dissident right that makes November wet and drippy as opposed to being perfectly sunny. Oh my God, a dissident right did it again. It tricked you into being dissident right. And this is just bullshit. Great marketing campaign, guys. You did a wonderful job. But unless you are endorsing Lizzo or Scott Wiener, you're not a centrist in any meaningful way. Unless you're on board with Ben Shapiro's foreign policy, you are not a centrist in any way. This is the reality, and you don't get to change labels. I mean, this is the other thing too. Academics in particular, and this is something that irritates me to no end. They're obsessed. I don't know what slide am I on, right? They are obsessed with labels for their ideology. Something that I've tried to avoid. I specifically used a shitty label for my YouTube channel when I started it in 2000 and I guess I started the blog in like 2013, like in the Stone Age when people still used Blogspot or whatever. Or sorry, was it WordPress back then? Yeah, this was the WordPress era. And I called it the distributist or the data distributist because I was a data scientist. I picked that name because it started with a D and because I wanted to pick an ideology that no one cared about, which I thought would be distributism. Now, I liked Hilaire Belloc. I liked G.K. Chesterton. I admired the distributist authors. I admire Mondragon, even though it was never officially distributist. It was sort of in the spirit of that. This is something that, a philosophy I admired, but it was done to kind of get around labels and to get at substance. Academics somehow really care about the words we use for things. And this is part of my problem with this thing. Academics don't like to be associated with groups because groups are always stupid. Groups are always going to do stupid things like ask for 50-year mortgages or, I don't know, buy Dinesh D'Souza books. Your groups are always going to do stupid things like that. And they're always going to be median people. This is always the problem with academics, is they never want to be associated with the median person. But the second that they're popular, the second that they have a following, unless the following is exclusively limited to the university, then immediately they will be associated with a movement that clusters around the median person. You can see this with Slavoj Zizek, right? The Slavoj Zizek arc that we witnessed over the last 20 years. And Slavoj Zizek was this ex-communist guy. I think he was still a Marxist, but he joined academia, and he was, for the first part of his career, he was just the most radical thing ever. This guy is going to stand up and defend Marxism and communism, and he's going to do a Hegelian analysis of this or that and come to conclusions that are absolutely anti-liberal. You can't get more radical than Slavoj Zizek, and it was even more humorous because he had this Eastern European thing. I'm Slavoj Zizek. I don't believe in anything. I'm a complete nihilist. It's just like, he kind of, people used to say that he was the Borat of philosophy because to do an accurate impression of Slavoj Zizek would be probably whatever the Slavic equivalent of anti-Semitism is. He's pretty much, he's like some Americans' parody of what a Slavic academic would look like. So, okay, Slavoj Zizek, but you could tell that a lot of the radicalism of Slavoj Zizek was cultivated because he hated being around median people. But then what happened, the tragic thing that happened to Slavoj Zizek in 2015 is that most of the Slavoj Zizek, did I say Vivek? Slavoj Zizek, the tragedy that happened in 2015 was that the majority of the young left in this country became either communist or communist adjacent. And suddenly, Slavoj Zizek was no longer radical, but just the representation of a mean type of political ideology. And he'd have tons of absolute midwits come up to him and try to contact him with his office hours and all sorts of terrible things like that. And immediately he tries to distance himself. He tries to move to the right. He tries to move anywhere because academics hate being associated with large movements of median people. The problem is, and this is the reason why I really want to criticize academic agent, and not really. I mean, all of the points he made in his videos are correct, but this kind of approach, this kind of nominal code switching, this kind of nominalist code switching, is, in my opinion, just not what modern public intellectuals should do responsibly. If you are a public intellectual and you have certain ideas, make those ideas known. And if you're wrong, then say you were wrong about them. When I started my YouTube channel, I was still somebody who believed that liberalism could be saved. In one of my first debates or streams with someone named Argent Templar, I remember saying that I think liberalism can be saved. I obviously did not believe that a year later, and most of my career on YouTube has been going in the exact opposite direction, post-liberalism. That's fine. That's a process. But it's not really, I hate to say this, though, this nominalist code switching when it comes to political labels betrays the fact that people don't respect how politics really works. And I know the academic agent understands how politics really works. Politics at a large level is fundamentally Schmittian. It's fundamentally friend-enemy. You can't be centrist or leftist, academic agent, because the centrists and the leftists are your enemies. So regardless if in some abstract way you think that they have a point, or you want to be associated with the high IQ people who are in universities over all the chuds that are online who like your stuff, despite whether that is the case, the friend-enemy distinction is stronger and the friend-enemy distinction is real. And those people, those liberals and centrists, are your enemies, and nothing short of embracing their religion organized around racial minorities and sexual minorities is going to change that. Furthermore, your friends, even if they're midwits, are still your friends. And when we do this whole nominalist code switching, which is kind of, it's useful for academics because it keeps their brand fresh, and it means that they're not associated with idiots, especially idiots in politics. But this nominalist code switching, I feel it kind of fucks over your community. Because I know this thing, right? Do I want to bring this whole episode up again from last year? But let's take the many people who have denounced the distant right. They build a brand, and the brand is distant right, and they will call themselves dissident right. And what's worse is their fans call themselves dissident right. So then something happens and they change their mind. Now, one thing you could do is you could forget about labels and say, dissident right is just a name I used for myself, doesn't really mean anything. But here is where I was wrong. Like, for me, I was wrong on liberalism. That's fine. Or I was wrong on, let's just say, tariffs, to pick a random issue. I was wrong on that, mea culpa, whatever, but I'm coming clean on you. And to the extent that so-and-so who's very, very pro-tariff disagrees with me, let's have a debate. That, in my opinion, is the right way to go about a change of heart. The wrong way to go about a change of heart is just to dump all over the label that your community uses for itself. The people who like your content, they're having political conversations with their friends and family. And what naturally happens in conversations with friends and family over politics is they'll hear a few weird ideas and people will say something like, what do you call these ideas? Are they fascist? Are they distributist? Are they dissident right? And then, what will happen is that the person who follows your content or reads your content will or they neo-reactionary, they'll use the label that you most commonly use for yourself. So when you get up and you don't name names about who you're having this agreement on, or you don't explicitly dialectically examine the issue that you were wrong about, or call out the disagreement you're having with other intellectuals. If your response is, oh, my channel needs a rebrand, so I'm going to take this name that I've used to associate with all my ideas collectively, in which probably my fans have adopted, and because I need a rebrand, I'm just going to shit all over it. That will piss off the people who followed you, and I don't see how it shouldn't piss off the people who followed you, because they don't have a YouTube channel. They can't, they can't come out with their new ideology. If if one moment they say they're dissident right, and they forward all of their friends the channel, the Academic Agent channel, and then next month Academic Agent is denouncing the dissident right, it looks to their friends like they're total cucks. Like the person they forwarded their friends to is denouncing the original person who was spreading your content. And it's fine, right? You can say, like, I don't think this is a good title anymore. I don't think conservative is a good title. But these extended sessions where people denounce various titles they've used for themselves, it just feels like a big, big dick move to do to your own community, who's likely used that title for themselves when they've explained the ideas secondhand. I think that, again, Academic Agent is brilliant, and I'll continue to watch him, and all you guys should continue to watch him too. I just think that he's kind of chasing the dragon, so to speak. He's following this script that is common in academia to stop getting hammered down on any given point, and to freshen up his content, he's kind of using different labels and cycling through them all. But nobody in their right mind in the real world is ever going to see the ideas that Academic Agent supports on his channel and call him anything but a right winger. Again, maybe I missed the video where he goes all in on group equality, where he goes all in on mass migration, where he thinks that sexual degeneracy should be taught in kindergarten along with surgical transitions. But if you don't believe those things, you ain't a leftist. You ain't a leftist in any real place that I've ever been to. And I have lived almost my entire life in university towns or urban areas. And if you're not a leftist in Berkeley or New York or San Francisco or LA or Seattle or Portland, then you ain't a leftist and you ain't a centrist either. You're a person who's LARPing as a centrist or a leftist. And, great. Awesome rebrand. Let's go for Academic Agent New World Order. This sounds like a great piece of television. But no one on the real world is going to be confused about this for a second. You are a right-winger. Your fans are right-wingers. And the only people who are conceivably taking your denouncement of the right wing seriously are your fans from a year ago who decided to call themselves right-wingers because you called yourself a right-winger. That's what's been achieved. A fresh rebrand, a cool new twist on the YouTube channel, kind of a dig on your own community. For me, that's not worth it, right? But hey, different strokes for different folks. I think that this is kind of an ignorable topic. And let's get to sort of the closer into the topic that I wanted to talk a little bit more about. The interesting things that have emerged from these topics. The subject of community and real power. Now, I'm not going to talk about the event. Almost everyone was talking about community and collective action. In 2025, in a post-discourse age, your politics are basically your allies. That's it. And the thing is that, how should I put this? Your politics are your allies. Obviously there is a parasocial relationship going on here. I see that I have about 600 concurrent viewers right now. I cannot keep 600 people in my head at one time. It's impossible. I knew a ton of people I got to meet actually a few people that are long time internet friends, like Society Man. Unfortunately, my wife wasn't feeling well, so I had to leave from the after party earlier. But it's kind of interesting. You see these people who you have kind of an online social relationship with, and you get to meet them, and you want to hang out more, but no, it just doesn't work out. But that is in a post-discourse age. The natural result of a post-discourse age is the fact that your community, your allies are your politics, your allies are your power, and of course there is a common set of morals and a common set of religious principles that unifies you in purpose, and that creates the undergirding for intergenerational cooperation. But that's really the basis of it, and in the discourse age, ginning up controversy was it. And if you're a bread tuber, ginning up controversy is still an optimal option. I shouldn't have to point this out, but this is obviously the key utility of one Nick Fuentes. I mean, Nick Fuentes was very notable in the fact that he almost entirely eschewed allies. He would make alliances with one person, like James Alsop. 6 months later, he would denounce him. He'd make an alliance with Patrick Casey, and then 6 months later, he denounced them. I have seen about 6 of these people who Nick has allied with, and then kind of, if I didn't know better, I might say he backstabbed them. But the process allowed him to get more clout, to build a bigger platform for himself, to center himself more in his own community, which is what he really wanted. And he was able to get to the top of the heap. I don't want to say good for him, but that worked for him. I don't think that works for many other people. That definitionally cannot work for anybody but the very person at the top. I'm not interested in developing community like that. I'm interested in developing a brotherhood and a broad hierarchy of men working for a collective purpose. I think that is more stable, and I think that Nick Fuentes, maybe he will become the new thing. Maybe he will become the leader of us all. But despite his manifest talent, a more probable outcome for Nick Fuentes is that eventually his tower, that's really just based around a cult of his own personality, will come toppling down at some stage. No, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he will become the Fuhrer of the West. But that is really the only two outcomes. And I'll say this too: after Nick Fuentes dies and he is mortal, there'll be no more Nick Fuentes brand. It is not, cults of personality and cloud are by definition not intergenerational. And I'm not interested in things that are only for one lifetime. I'm interested in things that last across multiple generations. The entire folly of our age is that everything we do in this period sort of just assumes that the world is going to end in 12 years. I'm not saying there aren't like viable apocalyptic scenarios that are emerging on the distance. People talk about them all the time. The financial apocalypse, the tech apocalypse, the climate apocalypse, what have you. We could discuss their plausibility or not, but there's a high probability that the world is not going to end in 12 years. And the world does not end in 12 years. We're going to have to talk about intergenerational politics, and that's where the question of community and power comes. And in community and real power, friendships and relationships are everything. Those are your politics, not your clout, not your engagement, not your name recognition. And there are certain things that facilitate that community. There are certain things that give it life. There is a certain question that does not begin with J, but, excuse me, probably should. Or, I don't know, was that too spicy for YouTube? Whatever. This was the most interesting part of the conservative freak out over Nick Fuentes. And this one, I couldn't really believe my eyes. So, of course, what happens? I'm narrating this. I'm going to have to write this up again. in a few days. But this is just me part of being a consistent, good podcaster. I'm not going to stop podcasting to finish essays. The Substack people will have to wait. What happens after the Nick Fuentes, Tucker Carlson debate is that the Heritage Foundation comes out and defends Tucker's right to free speech, basically ending the prospect that he could be canceled. And of course, this causes even more outrage by the mainstream neocon shells. Now, not only do we need to cancel Fuentes, not only do we need to cancel Tucker Carlson, we need to cancel the entire Heritage Foundation. This is an outrage. Blah, 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 blah. Fine. It's an outrage. Great. And sure enough, 3 days later, the director of the Heritage Foundation, I can't remember what his name was. I'm not even going to look it up. It's not important. He issues a retraction and a condemnation of Tucker, just like the neocons want him to do. Fair enough. We were expecting it. But then some strange things happen. Some strange things start happening in Heritage Foundation USA. They start leaking tapes to try to fight back against their own, because this is the secret. Everyone knows this, right? Everyone knows that while all the boomers are hopping on the let's cancel Tucker Carlson, the bandwagon, whenever they hop on that bag, when everyone knows that all of the Zoomers, all of the young people in the conservative movement are not on that bandwagon. They are people who are deeply Orthodox Christian, or just, small O Orthodox Christian. They're people who take identity politics very seriously. They're people who take the collective good very seriously. All of those things are things that they deeply value. So while the Heritage bigwigs are all getting reined in by the establishment conservative pro-Zionism wing to denounce Nick Fuentes even harder than they already have, you can tell they're dealing with a youth revolt. And so what they do is they try to incriminate their own interns, basically, their own staffers, their own people who are fresh out of college and trying to get up in the world of conservatism. And in this bizarre clip, they release, apparently, as a means of rectification, they invited all of the staffers over to Shabbat dinner. Now, okay, I mean, maybe it's a Friday dinner, and apparently a few of the staffers objected to being invited to Shabbat dinner because Friday for Catholics generally, but for people who are a little more Orthodox Catholic, is a fasting day. Specifically, it's meatless, but you're also not supposed to have huge festive celebrations on Fridays. Probably not built into the TGI Fridays business model. Not a lot of Catholics in the modern world do this, but I've known a lot who do and who take it very, very seriously. And they just freaked out about this. Why aren't you attending Shabbat dinner? There's nothing in the Bible. You've all these Jews piling on, saying, oh, there's nothing in the Bible that tells you. This is the favorite thing that anybody can do. And this just tells you the Shabbat dinner question. The Shabbat dinner question. Let's see who's our friend and enemy by inviting them to Shabbat dinner, and then the people who don't attend, maybe not our enemies, but probably not our friends, maybe. And that's obviously what the people at the Heritage Foundation thought. And they thought that when these Catholics objected to that because of the Meatless Friday thing, that they had successfully identified an enemy and they were going to flush them out by essentially doxing private communications. Fuck, great. That's perfect. Oh my God. What a brilliant political move. That's exactly what, and you know what even makes it better? Not only are we going to disclose private messages and publicly humiliate people for private religious objections and dietary restrictions, not only are we going to call them an enemy and essentially denounce them for being worried about the very thing that is going on right now. I mean, the objection was, I'm afraid if I don't attend the Shabbat dinner, I will be kind of passed over. I will be seen as somebody who's not cooperating. Well, guess what? That's exactly what they did. That's exactly what they assumed. They assumed that you weren't on board. And if that wasn't enough, the end result of this is for people like Mark Levin and John Podhoretz and the brain genius Bethany Mandel. Bethany Mandel. I'm sure she's a lovely wife. But she has done more damage to the Jewish conservative cause than any individual in the history of American Jewish conservatism. And if I were her husband, who had any concern for the future of my children with that woman, I'd take that woman's phone away and drop it down the toilet. Because she is going to single-handedly cause fiasco after fiasco for the Jewish conservative community, because what she inevitably does is she inevitably tells everyone that in order to be a proper conservative, Christians have to theologically endorse Judaism. Christians can't attempt to convert Jewish people. Christians can't invoke religious principles against Judaism. We can't rehash arguments we've had with Jews theologically on the subject of Christ's identity or Christ's death or Christ's presence in hell if you're a certain kind of Orthodox Jew. All of those things are anti-Semitic. The book of John is anti-Semitic. If you want to convert Jews, you're anti-Semitic. Not only are you anti-Semitic, from Bethany Mandel's point of view, if you are a Christian who believes in Jesus and wants to convert Jews to the belief in Christ King, then you are an enemy of all Jews, period. Exclamation mark. Put that to the top of the timeline. My God, the most brilliant political thinker of all time. I'm so glad we this is not the Jewish question. This is the woman question. I'm reasonably certain that she was pregnant when she did this or something, because she was not thinking straight. Women always do this. They escalate and escalate and escalate, because throughout their entire career, when they're being insulted by a man, they can just escalate the situation, and eventually some larger authority is going to step in and say, you can't be mean to Bethany Mandel. We're punishing you for being mean to Bethany. Now go to your room and say I'm sorry to your sister. That's their model. And you can tell Bethany has had this experience growing up in a Jewish household. I sympathize. That's the experience that women get in college classrooms. The conversation's heat can only escalate so much till the authority comes in and makes the woman win by default. That doesn't work in religion. That doesn't work in high politics. The ultimate escalation you get from escalating and escalating and escalating and escalating and insulting your allies is that your allies declare war on you. And now you're sitting with a bunch of Christians that used to be your friends who now hate you and think that you're their enemy, the enemy of their religion. And like I always say, politics is what you can't walk away from. And if people who used to be your allies think that you're the enemy of their religion, they are going to turn on you and fight you to the death. I don't think many women understand this, and certainly no pregnant women understand this. And like I said, if I were Bethany Mandel's husband, I'd take that woman's phone away and flush it down the toilet. Her career needs to end for the good of the Jewish race itself. I'm trying to look out for you guys here. I really am. You can't do this. You can't. And while we're at it, maybe we should take John Podhoretz's phone away too. The guy is really getting on in years, and he doesn't even understand the same game. It's so funny. And it doesn't have anything to do with the Jewish question. It doesn't have anything to do with the woman question. This is the Shabbat dinner question. And this is what makes it interesting. What was the point of the Shabbat dinner? This is the perfect example of what I always say about systems of managerial control. What always undoes them is that they're such brilliant things. They're such critical pieces of political and cultural and religious technology. They're such masterfully crafted things. And the previous generation like hones this like a blade, like a freaking katana. It's absolutely exquisite in how it operates. The Shabbat dinner, it's beautiful in its magnificence and simplicity. And then they give it to fucking idiot children who don't understand what the thing is, who never were disciplined enough to actually train themselves in how to use this beautiful political instrument. And they take it out and try to chop the tree down with the katana, and they bend the blade in half. And there goes 150 years of tradition. You just ruined it, right? You took 80 or 100 years of careful Jewish crafting of political cultural power, and you just shat all over it because you were so emotionally incompetent, and you had boomer brain or pregnancy brain or angry woman brain, and you just decided to nuke it all. You have no idea what this thing is. You have no idea what the Shabbat dinner thing is. This is where my story begins. I grew up around mostly Jews. Now, half of the Jews I knew were atheists. The other half were not Orthodox, but I'd say conservative Jews. Not one person, but many people. These are many families. It's amazing. I think most of my friend group was actually Jewish. Now, I went to many families' bar mitzvahs. I'm surprised that this little growing bald patch on my head isn't from all the times I put on yarmulkes, the many, many times I attended Shabbat dinners, and the many, many times I went to bar mitzvahs. It was a very regular occurrence. Again, not just one family, but many. Okay, I mean, what is the Shabbat dinner? Shabbat dinner is basically just Sabbath dinner, you know. It basically is a Sabbath dinner for Jews. It's not nefarious. They've done this for hundreds of thousands of years. Probably not thousands of years. This is probably something that's a few hundred years old. But let's humor the Talmudic sect and say that it's thousands of years old. I don't want to put down anyone's religion. I don't want to, I want to be an asshole about this. But hey, hundreds of years old, that's as old as any of my people's traditions either, right? I'm a Danish Schwabian, and on my mother's side, I'm some mixed meat German meets Irish, right? That's what Danish Schwabians as an ethnic group don't even go back more than 400 years before we lose contact with tradition and just become generalized people that were living in the Rhine Delta somewhere, in Baden-Württemberg or whatever. Traditions are usually a lot less old than we think they are. But in the American context, Shabbat dinner is actually kind of a wonderful thing. It's people getting around and like praying over food, and there's this whole ceremony of hand washing, and it's usually very festive. It includes a chicken dinner, which again, if you're Catholic, is exactly what you should not be eating on Fridays at any time, but most particular in Lent. And it's a very interesting thing because it feels like it's part of the old world. Now, was Shabbat dinner a political tool? In some sense, it was. It was not an explicit one. It was a subtle one. At Shabbat dinner, like what you're basically just, as a Gentile invited over, you're kind of just play acting as a Jew for an evening, and you're play acting as a Jewish person at kind of like the high point of their weekly routine. So, and this is interesting because, this is the most Jewish night. This is the night they say the most prayers. This is where the I don't think it's a menorah, but where the candles are lit. And this is part of a very classic tradition, and like you get to play along with this. And of course, at every stage of the ritual, you're asking, "Can I do this? Can I do that?" And they're saying, "No, you have to wait. No, you have to do this. No, you should do this. It's good luck to do that." And you're following along. "Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much for teaching me your culture. Thank you so much for teaching me your culture." And this is like the cultural exchange that you're doing. Great. And that's awesome. And I really think that it's great that they invite us, people invited us over to do that. This absolutely centers the Jewish cultural experience and makes Jewish culture kind of the center of all conversations. During Shabbat dinner, the cultures on display are Jewish culture and non Jewish culture. You wouldn't talk about your Friday night traditions at their Shabbat dinner. That would be kind of a dick move. The entire Shabbat dinner is mostly talking about their traditions and their history and your relation to their collective. That's always the conversation that the group likes. Like this is always. I have no hostility towards the Jew. Well, I mean, obviously, I think their religion is wrong, right? But I have no general hostility to this group. But I noticed that the only frame they're comfortable with is me, deracinated individual, in my relationship to their collective interest and their deep, 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 beautiful religion and tradition that can never be changed and that is valuable above everything else. That's the frame that they love. The problem with Shabbat dinner, and I noticed this when I was in high school or in pre-high school. The Jews that invited us over to Shabbat dinner were highly allergic to any type of Christian ceremony. They didn't like getting invited to Christmas caroling parties. My parents were atheists. My parents were total atheists. They completely eschewed tradition in this regard. The Christmas caroling was as secular could be. But they didn't like coming to baptisms. They didn't like coming to Easter. They always said no to the Easter invitations. They didn't like the Christmas celebrations. And these were all super secular holidays. And they said no, 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 no. They didn't like to participate in any of those things. Did we take offense? No. Even when we had Jewish people over for dinner, usually my family said a prayer, and this is kind of ridiculous, right? It's kind of ridiculous. My family was atheists. We didn't attend church. But I think that since one of our cousins, our close cousins, were religious, they said grace. And when we were like 5, we demanded, because kids like rituals, we say grace too. But when our Jewish and Muslim friends came over, we just dumped the prayers. Like, we didn't want to subject them to that. But I remembered every time I came over to Shabbat dinner on their house, I said like probably 15 minutes of prayers if you put them all back to back. There's the prayer of the wine, there's the prayer of the bread, there is a song, there is a prayer before you lit the candles, there is the prayer afterwards. It was a whole deal. And this is yeah, I mean, that's great. That's great. But I'm noticing a little bit of a double standard here, right? An extreme allergy to any kind of rich cultural element from a Gentile source, a kind of eagerness to make me participate in their cultural source. And this is the real power of the Shabbat dinner. And John Podhoretz and Bethany Mandel are morons. They don't understand that the power of Shabbat dinner is subtle. It's not supposed to be to decide who's a friend and who's an enemy. It's supposed to bring people into a cultural conversation where Judaism is the default religious assumption and the default traditional assumption, and everyone else is a deracinated individual. That's what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to be subtle. It's supposed to be festive. But it's still a huge cultural technology. I mean, I don't know. I mean, is it right? I would probably say yes to Shabbat dinner, but I don't know. I think that I might hesitate though. What if, for instance, we invited them over to the Feast of the Assumption dinner that we are hosted at our church, or the Corpus Christi dinner, or Mardi Gras is not really religious at all, but maybe even that. Who knows? Shrove Tuesday. You got it. Or any of the festivals that we usually celebrate. Easter dinner. That's a good one enough, right? If they're rejecting all of our invitations to these holidays, and they want me to come over to Shabbat dinner, I'm maybe say no to that, as a matter of fact. And I'll certainly say no to it if it involves essentially reneging on a fast I've undertaken. Now, I'm kind of not, I have a reputation of being a trad Catholic online. We go to church every week. We are, as far to the best of my ability, completely adherent to the Catechism of the Catholic Church. We are very inconsistent followers of the Friday fast outside of Lent, although I try. I oftentimes don't make a very big effort. But if I were a Catholic that was putting in the effort to observe that fast as I should be, I certainly would say no to the Friday night festive celebration meat meal. What do you want me to do? Right? Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot. You're the only tradition that matters. Well, come right over. But here's the second thing too, and it relates back to the question of community and power. What is the the equivalent? And this is something something I've been thinking a lot about. Um, we want we don't really want to. I mean, it was kind of funny that they were trying to ruin people's lives and ruin people's careers for not attending a Shabbat dinner, which is ridiculous and absolutely out of line. That someone wants to observe their religious fast during Friday. Let's get them. That's like that's the kind of anti-Catholic attitude you'd associate with some like very vindictive person. And so it's obvious that the Podhoritzes and Bethany Mandels of the world are just totally out to lunch on this. They have no idea what they're doing. But as far as conservatives are concerned, that's not really what our objective should be. We shouldn't really care about Shabbat dinner or what people choose to do on Friday night or not do. Uh, we should strive for more friends and more allies. And the same thing, I have the same message for Jews as I have for every other people. If you're pro me, I'm pro you. I don't want to have you as an enemy. I want all people to thrive, but I'm not going to betray the people who are directly my responsibility so that you can pursue some kind of weird millenarian identity politics, like this strange Zionist project that's going on right now. And I'm not going to co-sign your attempts to ethnically cleanse people while at the same time making me feel guilty of things that happened 80 years ago or 90 years ago at this stage almost. This is not something that is going to happen. But beyond all that, the real missing thing in this equation is what's our equivalent of Shabbat dinner? I mean, that's really what we should be thinking about. Now, look, I gave you a few examples. My wife and I used to do Burns night. It's kind of an ethnic thing. Ironically, neither of us are Scottish. I adopted it because I'm a big fan of folk music and I like Robert Burns. We do feasts for various Catholic holidays, certainly too. And but at the same time, the type of thick folkishness, the festiveness that you will encounter at a Shabbat dinner is just not typically done in the Gentile world as much. There has been a loss of folkishness. And a lot of people will say, well, that's because our ruling class disincentivized it. And our ruling class was largely comprised of not Gentiles, let's say. Look, yes and no, but it's really not, that's not a problem anymore. The problem these traditions aren't existing is because we have not done enough to shore them up. There should be, I've said this before many times, hosting dinner parties and hosting dinner parties in a sacred way should be a regular part of your adult existence. It should be a regular part of your adult existence. Now, look, maybe this whole, maybe this whole glomming on to things like Burns Night is not the right approach. And we should be looking for things that are more American and more organic to our lives today. But I think that it is a technology of culture and power to break bread with people collectively and to remember our larger responsibility to our ancestors and to our descendants. And here's another thing that I later learned. With a lot of the families that celebrated Shabbat dinner when I was a child, half of them didn't believe in God. This is just a fixture of a cultural tradition that they were carrying on for the purpose of their collective identity and for the continuation of their culture. That is what Shabbat dinner meant. But it was a vector of power. It brought together their own community to remind them of their common purpose. When outsiders were involved, it necessarily involved the outsiders and their collective purpose, and it forced them to come to the table as a friend or violate sacred understandings of what it means to be a proper guest. And that's something that all civilized people understand. All civilized people understand that if you accept an invitation to break bread with somebody in their house, you cannot insult their religion, you cannot insult their culture. That is not the appropriate place, and you certainly cannot do them harm in any way. And if people don't understand that, they are your enemies because they're essentially agents of chaos. They are essentially barbarians. And so the existence of the traditional dinner as a regular feature simultaneously functions as a mode of religious piety, as a cultural technology to continue on collective consciousness, and his ability to subtly determine friend from enemy, which is, in our post-discourse age, the only really thing that matters or that's meaningful. Not the stupid labels we attach to our ideologies that we switch every 2 years because we want to create a bit of a headline on our YouTube videos. That's not what the thing is for. Gentiles have lost the sense of folkishness, a sense of wasp. I was never a wasp. None of my family were ever wasps. I have some blood that comes from the British Isles, not much. I'm mostly continental, as you can probably tell from my dark, swarthy features, as Benjamin Franklin would have them. But we've lost that guiding sense of folkishness in any kind of American capacity. There's no tradition that hands down through the ages. And one of the things that was a consistent feature of all of this in the Portland talk was the desire. One of the best speakers, they were all good speakers, but the one that left the most impact on me was Kevin Dolan from the Exit Group. And he said, remember that whatever you do twice for your children is a tradition. It's a way that you can give them a sense of collectivity. And this is funny because just before the conference, I had breakfast with a friend. He might be listening to this podcast for all I know. And we were talking about Portland. Now, Portland is kind of like the ne plus ultra of individualism. You know, like I said, how traditions of dinner and dinner parties were always a thing in my life. And when I was in college, we used to do dinner parties. This was like a big thing people did to seem more mature. Because people assumed that they would just slide into bourgeoisie life. However, millennials largely didn't. And so in my own memory, you know, there's this phenomenon of Portland. Because when I moved to Portland after I got out of college, it almost felt like I was kind of stepping back into a less mature point of my life. I had gotten a job at a tech company. I was living on my own. I was doing my own thing. But when I was trying to develop my identity outside of just working, outside of doing things in the in pure entertainment capacity, like going to movies, I felt like all of Portland was just communicating the fact that I was an individual, that I was somebody who existed as kind of in a perpetual state of college. And this was more or less the time that the AMC show Portlandia was on the air too. And it's kind of a weird bookend, more or less. And I felt that Portland was the future. This idea of bourgeoisie life and collective tradition, I lamented it. At that point, I had already become religious again. And I wasn't really firmly planted in my Catholicism yet, but I saw what was lost and I lamented it. But I saw Portland as kind of the end point of a process of making college permanent and making irony permanent. And it's funny because my friend who I met for breakfast just before we did the conference, his wife was there. My wife, both our wives were there. And his wife said this. She said, Portland feels like it's stuck in the 2010s. I didn't laugh at the time, but I found myself laughing pretty much all the way home, all the car ride. That was kind of echoing back in my mind. It's like Portland is the end of history, but history is not supposed to go back. It's not supposed to get past the early 2010s. It's just supposed to reach that point of Portlandia where everyone's an eternal hipster and an eternal creative, and we're all irony poisoned to our gills, and we're just gonna stay there forever. We're never gonna advance. We're never going to decline. We're never gonna get old. We're just gonna stay there forever in this eternal adolescence. And now you go back to Portland, and everything feels dated. Not only does everything feel dated, everything feels empty. When we're driving around downtown Portland, I saw barely any cars. That place used to be packed on a Friday night, and there were no cars there on what for many people is a long weekend because of Veterans Day, right? It's Veterans Day today, right? Okay, cool. All of the coffee shops feel totally out of place. Back in the day, all the tables had old newspaper clippings with obituaries and ironic juxtapositions of Elvis and Kiss with various 19th century figures, looking like you're cutting like kind of a steampunk aesthetic marked with heavy, heavy, heavy doses of irony, of course. But now it just feels like kind of a recollection of the 80s, like if you had walked into a dive bar and there were neon lights and people in cowboy boots. This is a place that's stuck in the past. But the past is rootlessness. The past is individualism. The past is childishness. Somebody asked me to kind of comment on this. And, in addition to Portland, Oregon being kind of the apex of this feeling, there was also another phenomenon I remember growing. And that was the phenomenon of Adult Swim. Now, I'm coming up on time, so I'll try to keep the last portion a little bit faster. But Adult Swim was a program put on by the Cartoon Network where they premiered original content that was usually remixes or parodies of older cartoons. The Cartoon Network initially was mostly for rehashing old cartoons like Hanna-Barbera or old DC cartoons. And I think the first show they had was Space Ghost Coast to Coast, this was super ironic, came out in the year 2000, and it was this old DC superhero called Space Ghost, except other than doing superhero stuff, other than being a superhero, Space Ghost's role was to be like a David Letterman talk show host. And they would have Space Ghost interview real people like Tom York and I don't know, Lil Wayne, was he a thing back in the day? Most Def, all of these kind of like B tier celebrities. I don't exactly know how they made the cartoon talk to the people, but there was barely any interaction because the whole thing was wall to wall irony. And of course, they spinned off more and more shows. The Brack Show, uh, the Birdman, Attorney at Law, Space Lab 2020, Oxygen Hunger Force. These were all super ironic things. And this was sort of the end point of the 1990s was this mode of supremely distilled irony. There was no real point to these shows. They were mainly self-parodies. They were always winking at the camera. They were always making reference to other things. The animation was notoriously horrible, and there were always non sequiturs going on. There was always non sequiturs. The plot never really panned out, and it was sort of a sincerity free environment. This is as far as you could push the irony envelope. And then another non. I think this might have been on Adult Swim, even though it wasn't animated. There was Tim and Eric's awesome show, Great Job, which had Tim Heidecker and Eric, someone, I don't know, but these were two guys that, after their show, kind of became notorious ship-lived figures. And they did like this parody of a a local television network, the kind of like home shopping network, not really boomer bait, but kind of silent generation bait, what old people would watch when they were in nursing homes. And of course, they just make it egregious and horrible. It's kind of, this is sort of the aesthetic that Million Dollar Extreme would later adopt. But whereas, Tim and Eric always pointed this parody angle at old America, at traditional America that was already being subverted, Million Dollar Extreme pointed the subversion straight at the globalist class, and therefore was a lot more fresh, a lot fresher. I'm not sure. But this was kind of crescendoing all throughout the 2000s. This Adult Swim set of television shows, and I think by the time I arrived at Portland, Oregon, that years was like what? Oh God, I'm feeling old. 14 years ago, 14, 15 years ago, was I in Portland, just got to Portland, Oregon, or maybe I'd been there for a year. And I was kind of looking out at the morass of individualism, and everyone was doing their ironic thing, and everyone was kind of dying for sincerity, dying for some kind of thing that wasn't ironic, that was kind of sincere, maybe still fun, hopefully still in the spirit of childishness, but still having like an energy, an optimism to it. Whereas Tim and Eric and Aqua Teen Hunger Force were just bleak. They're just bleak views on the modern world. And so more than any other, one show in particular characterized my time in Portland, Oregon. This is, it wasn't Portlandia, if I'm going to be honest. It wasn't Portlandia. Portlandia was kind of an inside joke, and nobody in Portland really watched much of it. Although I kind of snuck episodes because everyone would make the jokes anyway. The show was Adventure Time. And once more, everyone was yearning for sincerity in one form or the other. And everyone was passing around this clip of every millennial's favorite lit bro author, David Foster Wallace, the author of Infinite Jest and later The Pale King, just before he killed himself. And this is the essay they were always passing around, the talk they were always passing around, was a talk by the title of This is Water. And it's about how modern life is just, we are living and breathing in this attitude of cynicism, in this attitude of meaninglessness. And we have to have moments where we get out of ourselves, where we look at our lives and realize that all of this bullshit we're dealing with, like stressing out over our jobs, worrying about the economy, picking up groceries from the grocery store, worrying about that date, all of this serves a greater purpose. And in the meantime, the stuff that we're stuck in, the cynicism, this is the water we swim in, like fish, right? We can't see the cynicism, but we have to remind ourselves this is water, there's something greater. And so there was this millennial project for sincerity. And my answer to this, although there were many, a lot of people found their answer in young adult fiction. A lot of people found their answer in other shows like Adventure Time, like Steven Universe. But Adventure Time was one of the first, and it was one of the best. And I'm using that sort of cynically. I'm using that with a kind of dark foreshadowing. Adventure Time was what a lot of millennials discovered. Okay, what is Adventure Time? So Adventure Time is, guess what? An Adult Swim Cartoon Network TV show. It's of the style that we call Cal Arts. Cal Arts was a very simplistic character style, oftentimes combined with elaborate backgrounds, sort of like Miyazaki, although rarely as advanced as Miyazaki. Lots and lots of color, and then kind of zany plots. Now, a lot of people tried to do this. Samurai Jack did this kind of Cal Arts style. There were some Star Wars ones that did this too. Those were more kind of typical blockbuster action adventure plots and not something that I was super into. They felt like I should just be seeing them in a movie. But Adventure Time was a product of one guy called Pendleton Ward. So, for people who are not familiar with the show, I'll give you a little bit of a rundown of the plot. So, Adventure Time features the adventures, no pun intended, of a boy and his dog. And they are in this zany, surreal world called Ooo. And in Ooo, it's this crazy fantasy land that it appears that there are basically no rules for what could happen or what could go right or what could go wrong. The princess, the main princess, although all women for the first two seasons in Adventure Time are princess this or princess that, but the main princess is literally made out of bubblegum and lives in a candy kingdom. The main villain is an ice wizard that tries to freeze various princesses and kidnap them because he's lonely. Very much in terms of the surrealism, Finn, the human as he's called, and Jake the dog live in a giant tree house. And oddly enough, Jake the dog has, in addition to talking, he's a talking dog, although it seems like most animals in this universe can talk. However, not only can Jake the dog talk like you might expect an ordinary Disney animal to do, he also has incredible stretchy powers, kind of like Mr. Fantastic or Mrs. Incredible. I think they're the same superpower, but Jake has this in spades. He can stretch himself to be large, he can stretch himself to be tiny, he can stretch himself into string around the entire world. There's almost nothing his stretchy powers can't do. And so he and Finn go on various adventures, and the adventures usually, there's a typical pattern to them. They start out very, very surreal and wonderful, and then they get really dark for like a few minutes. They go into a dungeon and they encounter weird zombies. They encounter bizarre creatures and bombed out cityscapes. And always there's these little hints that this is not a happy fantasy land, but really the aftermath of a darker war that destroyed the world. It's post-apocalyptic. And for all of us millennials that have a deeper knowledge of science fiction, will immediately relate the story of a boy and his dog in a post-apocalyptic, post-nuclear world to another very, very infamous piece of science fiction, A Boy and His Dog. And A Boy and His Dog is the most cynical of cynical science fiction short stories / movies where a boy and his hyper-intelligent dog are stuck in a wasteland. And, they act like complete sociopaths. They murder people. They rape women. They cannibalize people. But somehow they're still the heroes, right? Of course, Adventure Time forgoes that, but it slowly gets darker. It slowly gets, originally all plots are just, it's it's a 10-minute plot. A, B, C, weird, wacky, surrealistic adventure immediately gets resolved. There's a little bit of irony in terms of what's presented. There's a little bit of incongruity in what's presented. It's, after all, surreal, but there's always a real heart to it. The characters say what they mean and mean what they say. When something bad happens to them, they feel sad. When something good happens to them, they feel happy. And as the story gets darker and darker, you get more and more emotionally invested in these creatures. The wizard you discover is actually a tragic character and not a villain. A real villain comes on the scene that is absolutely horrific and destroys everything. Some characters die. You discover the backstory of the world, which is indeed nuclear war. You learn that humans have ostensibly all been wiped out, except for Finn the human. And all along, though, Finn is still the human, even though everything in the world is supernatural, and he's only a human. Even though his sidekick, Jake the dog, is superpowered to an incredible degree, and he's just a normal 15-year-old boy doing stupid 15-year-old boy stuff, including developing stupid crushes on people. A great concept for the show, and it's like Harry Potter in the way that it gets more mature and more mature and more mature. The real critical masterpiece or critical question of Adventure Time was, how is it going to end? Obviously, this show cannot end in an ironic way. It can't end with all the characters killing each other. It can't end like a Shaggy Dog joke with the plot being revealed to be prima facie ridiculous. There has to be some kind of conclusion to this. Furthermore, as we get more realistic, we ask more questions. Like, why does Jake the dog not just solve every problem instantaneously, since his powers of stretchiness seem to be infinite? And always, it seems, the problem with Jake is fundamentally in a state of arrested development. Jake is eternally a child. He is mature in dog years, but he's content to let his children wander about and not be a father and just live the life of an adolescent along with Finn, who actually is a human adolescent. So, Jake, it appears, is kind of like a deadbeat. He doesn't have direction. He doesn't have will. It's Finn whose heroic quality is will, whose heroic quality is the ability to focus and actually be mature. And so the adventures that go on are sort of, in most cases, Finn being a spiritual leader and Jake being kind of the muscle backup. But what ultimately are we trying to learn from this? What large questions does it raise about life and death? And of course, the show raises questions about life, death, and love, as young children usually realize as they grow older. But the only answers it really has is kind of a vague existentialism, which is fine, I guess. If you look at the line of Western history as it goes back, existentialism is kind of the last serious philosophy that was sincerely pursued, and that wasn't a cynical political formula to get power for the managerial state. The idea that you can make yourself, but the idea that you can define what your existence is going to be and what you're going to die for and give your life for in this world. And that's all well and good. But then there's a secondary question, which is Finn ever going to grow up? Now, eventually, the creators, and eventually Pendleton Ward leaves the show, and it's taken over by this other creative called Rebecca Sugar and another showrunner. I can't remember the other showrunner's name. And the show gets notably more politically contaminated. I'll say that. The show gets notably more politically contaminated. It gets kind of woke elements. Characters are recast as gay, blah, 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 blah. But they still need to answer this question about what the ending is going to be, because the only meaningful ending, eventually they come up with some ending where a big bad descends from the sky and everyone teams up to defeat them, and somebody dies and then someone else is saved and a lot of places are destroyed. And it's a satisfying enough ending. But the real questions aren't answered. And the real questions are, when is Finn the human going to grow up? And the natural suggestion for the ending is that Jake the dog is going to die because he's a dog and he only lives so long. And this is sort of suggested or foreshadowed in the actual show that Jake the dog was going to pass away. And so the perfect ending, the suggested ending of Adventure Time was that Jake was going to die and that Finn was going to decide to put away his reckless adventuring and dedicate himself to becoming an adult. And that would be, and the original tagline of the show is that Jake says, "What time is it?" And Finn says, "Adventure time." That's they stopped doing that after the first season. But that was the tagline of the pilot. That was the joke of the show. That's what gives the show its name. And, after there's no Jake there, after Jake passes away, the eternal adolescence, Jake, in some ways, represents the baby boomer that can never grow up. And Finn, the human, represents the millennial or zoomer that's trying to grow up. And then after Jake dies, Finn doesn't have access to superpowers to bail him out. He's just an ordinary human. He has to deal with reality as it is. He has to actually commit to people as they are. But the solution that Adventure Time seems to come up with is, sure, we know that this change is coming, but not now. Not now. Not now. The maturity of Finn is indefinitely pushed off into the horizon. Jake's inevitable death is inevitably pushed off into the horizon and never resolved. We see hints of the future Finn being somebody who's a responsible man with a family and a wife and who's repopulating Ooh with humans, maybe. That could be a thing. But that's never explored in the show because the show is always stuck in the same loop. And that's always the funny thing, right? That the show could be an indication of a certain time in adolescence. When adolescence comes upon you, as it does with the beginning of the show when Finn is 12, everything is kind of weird and wonderful, and your arguments are all things that don't make a big impact. And if you do screw up, there's always someone with special magical powers looking to bail you out and make sure that the adventure continues. And then eventually you realize that all of these challenges are really serious and for keeps, and people can die, and some decisions need to be made permanently. And then at some point, your parents can't help you. I guess the adventures still continue, but eventually they have to change. Eventually, it can't be that time anymore. And that was always the ending that Adventure Time needed to have. It needed to be, what time is it? It's time for new things. It is a different season. It is no longer Adventure Time. This was the period where adventures seem trivial and fun. It has a beginning. It has an end. And maybe in the future it'll be someone else's Adventure Time, as it's implied in the movie. They imply that the sword is taken up by somebody else. But more importantly, they never show Finn becoming mature. The message of Adventure Time should have been that youth is not indestructible. Eventually, we all have to define ourselves not in terms of individualism, not in terms of clout, not in terms of adventure, but in terms of our broader responsibilities for a community of people that are outside of ourselves. That was what the ending of Adventure Time should be. I've heard they've done spin-offs, but all I can hear is people complaining about them constantly. And sure enough, they're doing the one thing that they needed to do that never happened in the original Adventure Time show, which is they never show Finn becoming a responsible adult who's taking responsibility for the futures of people who are not him. Youth is not indestructible. It is a finite time, and that time is coming to a close. This is kind of the last part of the talk, the things that unifies both of the sides together. I didn't talk about discourse very much other than to make fun of Republicans at the beginning of this. But folkways are essential. They are essential spiritual tools. They're also essential political tools. One thing that's notable about millennials and Zoomers is how fragile we are. You hit us and we just go to pieces. Now, I don't know, just diet wise, for instance, my mother and father in law can drink me under a table at this stage. And I'm in way better shape than they are. Have a sedentary life, I guess, but I'm way younger and I have way more muscle. They can drink me under a table. They have better digestive tracts. Nothing seems to bother them the same way it does me. Millennials and Zoomers are very, very fragile. And we can argue, over whether it was luck, but we're also missing a core aspect of our daily lives that gave the boomers a certain type of anti-fragility. And that is that the boomers were born with and preserved in piecemeal a certain sense of a folk way, a certain pattern of existence, like Shabbat dinner, an element or tradition that gave them power, that gave them grounding. One of the best articles that's recently been published on Substack, although there's so many it's hard to keep track, on, everyone subscribe to Deadly New Right Post if you want to be abreast of the latest good article. But the one that's sticking in my mind most is John Slaughter's short treatise on proletarianization, which ran in the Old Glory Club's blog stack, Substack, whatever. It ran on the Old Glory Club's blog. And proletarianization is the fact that you as a generation are poorer than your parents. You just are poorer than your parents. There's no two ways about it. And since you're poorer than your parents, you cannot maintain the same habits of existence as they did. You didn't have Shabbat dinner. You went out on Tuesday nights with your parents. That was your way of celebrating, having a festive evening. But you can't afford that anymore. You can't afford to take the family out to sushi. That's crazy. That's hundreds of dollars. So naturally, you adopt the habits of the class directly below you because you have less money. The habits, and specifically the bad habits of the proletariat, or really the lumpen proletariat, become more prominent and more prominent and more prominent. The solution to this process of proletarianization is to find a folk way, to find a habit of being that is reflective of eternal values that are shared by the upper class, but still can be embodied in all of their essential qualities by the lower class. Shabbat dinner is one of those folk ways, but there are many more. There are many more in any one of our cultures, in German culture, in English culture, in white American WASP culture. These folkways have been forgotten, but these are the patterns that give us anti-fragility. These are the patterns that give us a certain connection to a community. These are the these are the patterns of life that allow us to become more resilient and more mature. I think that's what we need to start developing, and developing identities that complement that. Again, as Kevin Dolan said at the conference, a tradition is anything you do multiple times together in a sacred way. The path of things like basket weaving and things like the OGC, in order to be permanent and useful, must incorporate that folk sense of tradition and pattern of existence. At this stage, we've still been meeting, I think, in the spirit of Portland, in the spirit of singles. But it's going to have to take, I think, a deeper direction in the coming years, because I think that deeper connection is needed. Anyway, guys, that's the end of the lecture portion of the show. We're going to go on to Super Chats. Let me minimize this. Let me bring up entropy. There's my test thing. And let's go through the Super Chats. Thank you so much, guys. Okay, great, guys. Hopefully I have been trying to train myself not to say or like or and the problem is I can't I can't tell that I'm using these connection words while I'm doing it. So there you go. There you go. um, the shadow band for $25 USA just has '07. Well, thank you, sir. Again, I will be doing these things every 2 weeks, and hopefully, we will also be doing the Sunday podcast once every month. That might also change to every 2 weeks as well. Luckily, on the Sunday show, I will be having a co-host. Thank God, because I don't think I could carry 2 shows by myself. Hunter Counts, $25 USA. Hello, Dave. I finally got Entropy to accept my payment method. I wanted to ask you about the state of Catholic leadership, including the Pope. How should Catholics treat church leadership when many of them are clearly compromised by certain aspects of modernity? Do laymen like us have some legitimate form of redress or protest? The short answer is you do not have a form of redress or protest that can possibly reach the Holy See at in a time frame that you would care about. The Holy See makes decisions and corrections in the time frame of centuries. It took them the better half of a century to properly respond to the Reformation, and it will take them a better half of a century to properly respond to modernity. We have to pray for the Holy See, and by all means, write letters, create your own communities, and stay faithful to the teachings of the church. Ignore the leadership's cringe political opinions. That is not something that you're bound to as a Catholic. You are only bound insofar as you are Catholic to the specific theological opinions that are passed down in the form of doctrine. It is obvious that political leadership at the Vatican is highly compromised at this time. But luckily, this is not the first time that this has happened. So what we need to do as Catholics, I believe, is to build our own communities and then to try to influence the Catholic Church as much as we can through correct channels. What are correct channels? Correct channels are sympathetic priests, and in particular, sympathetic bishops. Proper channels are letter writing campaigns. Proper channels are taking your priest out to dinner and voicing your concerns and being present in your parish. And I'm one to speak. I have moved every 12 months for 5 years. I have not had a thick presence in any parish community. The most I've done for my parish in the last 5 years is teach Sunday school. That's all I've been able to do because I haven't been a presence in any one church for more than a year. We keep changing. But that is the avenue that's open for people in the Catholic Church when it comes to influencing things. 100 counts again for $5. I will soon be driving from Michigan to San Diego and finally to Washington State. I would like some well-known recommendations for lesser-known essential stops to make in California, particularly along the Pacific Highway. Okay, well, I mean, there's 2 options. You have for the way up to, where are you going to? Finally to Washington State. Okay, so I have spent most of my life, I feel like I basically live on the stretch of highway between Sacramento and Victoria, BC, or Vancouver, BC, depending on how you terminate these things. So I feel like I know this place by the back of my hand. But it's kind of funny because when I drove that stretch of highway in 2021, it was a zoo. It was post-apocalyptic. It was just absolutely insane. It felt like I was journeying into the wasteland, and I know that area really, really well. Look, I don't know if there's that many. I mean, like, for instance, this is stupid. Whenever I drive that highway, I always stop at the original Black Bear Diner in Shasta, which is right off of like the Lake Street exit on Shasta, right before you go to Weed. And it's bad food, but it's just such a nostalgic thing for me. I always go. There's tons of great little. I mean, if you want a touristy spot to stop off on, Ashland is like the number one chic little boutique town with like little shops you can shop at. If you want to go on an outdoor adventure, the Rogue River is really good. And then, then obviously like Eugene's a really nice place to stop. You already heard my opinion endlessly about Portland. But if you have more time and are going up to Washington State and you are really not faint of heart, you can always take Highway 1 slash Highway 101. It will take you 3 times as long, but you will get brilliant vistas, lots of sand dunes, cliffs and rocks, and little nice, little dotted cities on the edge of the ocean. Lots of classic West Coast Victorian architecture. A lot of people from the East Coast don't know this, but they the old people who colonized the Pacific states built all of these Victorian houses, and a lot of them are still standing. And so there's sort of a Victorian aesthetic to some of the older communities on the West Coast, which is very, very nice. Obviously, Victoria itself is probably the ne plus ultra of that thing. But I don't know. That's sort of your 2 options. I-5 is not particularly interesting. I have the places that I always stop, but they're not. And of course, there's an alternative way. Like you can go into the mountains. And I know me and Millennial Woes were talking about the hotels, like the hotel from Twin Peaks or the hotel from The Shining. But that's like an hour out of your way into the mountains, and this is not worth going there. At least in Highway 1, you're when you're driving in the less populated area, you're actually making progress to getting towards Canada, albeit at a very, very slow rate. But I love traveling across Highway 1. It is so much fun. If that's a vacation, I would go there. If I wanted to have a lot of little touristy little areas that you can hop out of the car and have a great time at, and then hop back in the car and keep on going, Highway 101 slash Highway 1 is your ticket. And, that is a lot of fun. Crescent City, another great little spot, and great seafood too on that route as well. Okay. Thank you very much, Hunter Counts. Fritz Imperial for $5 USA. Evening, Dave. As the luxury of food delivery and restaurants becomes less affordable, I think this is an opportunity to rediscover family cooking and old home recipes. I love learning how to cook from my chef dad. It connects us to a real culture. Yeah, it does. And this is one opportunity. If friends can get kind of a circuit of dinners going, it would be kind of fun to, like, every month there is a dinner party hosted by a different person. And the closer you made your little circle, either through the OGC or basket weaving or whatever other homesteading little conspiracy you're managing, whatever circle you were operating in, the more tight-knit you could be, the more frequent you could circulate the dinner party. And that would add a dimension of civilization and a dimension of culture. And you know what? Kids actually do pretty well in dinner parties, especially if the people you're eating with have kids too. Like, they can go off and play after they eat their food. And then the rest of the adults can talk about the sorry state of the world and what to do about it, which is what you really should be doing over dinner, which is why, politics only ruins dinner if you have a disagreement. Only political discourse ruins dinner conversation. So we should be taking advantage of the death of discourse and rediscovering the art of dinner time conversation in real life. That would be, if we could accomplish that through our efforts in organizing in real life, we would do a blow to the cathedral, a blow to the entropic elements of modernity like had never been sustained before. We should really do some work together, Fritz. I think you're a missed voice online, although you picked a hell of a time to come back to YouTube, because it is not a very target-rich environment like it was back in 2019. Dark Voyager for $10 USA. Who is having good conversations we should watch? What are the interesting ideas the right should look at? What are good books to pass on about contemporary times? Well, I mean, our rating list is almost too long to go over. I mean, I could talk about Julius Evola or Thomas Carlyle. I could talk about James Burnham. We could talk about the numerous things being published by Passage Press. I think we'd have to be more specific. Um, right now, I've noticed that there's been an increase in the amount of fiction that people have been writing. I am kind of in the market for short contemporary fiction. I know a lot of people are writing more long form fantasy, but I don't know exactly how to incorporate that into my reading habits yet. I am enjoying John Slaughter's book though. Crimson. I don't go on the title. It's oh my god. I'm all I can think of is Crimson. It's not Crimson Tide. But anyway, John Slaughter's book is very, very good, though. Who's having good conversations? Another interesting question. Conversations are kind of hard to come by. There are a few conversations that are going on right now. There are the internal conversations about how we operate inside modernity, which you get, uh, which you get from uh, you get from circles like this, or for instance, like the OGC they have like weekly roundtables on community organizing that they run from their Chapter House series, which are really very useful and good. And I think those are really great resources for like internal community conversations. There's a new show that's called Pony Express Radio. And like, look, there's tons of news podcasts, so you probably don't need news podcasts, right? Insofar as there are ideological discourse conversations, the big ones going on right now is that there's a war between conservatives and right wingers on the right. And that we talked about at the beginning of the podcast. There's a conversation between moderates and leftists going on in the circles of the New York Times. That's also a conversation that you should be aware of. And then there's also kind of a conversation on the left, but the left is just so effeminate and paused that describing what they do as a conversation is kind of like saying that animals have language. It's kind of, it's not really a conversation. There's a struggle on the left over what it means to be the radical opposition and the ideology that will be the post-right ideology. And this is a very interesting conversation, but because they're leftists, they don't communicate in ideas and arguments. They just kind of point and emote at each other and then try to cancel each other by backstabbing each other and undermining each other's prominence. But you can see that there is a struggle inside the left over who will be their next standard bearer. But I don't know. The white left as we know it in the 20th century is a dying political force. What will inevitably take over from them is a kind of revenge-seeking third worldism mixed with some amount of hard communism. That will be the new left. And of course, it's a new left that the right has absolutely no ability to talk about. The loyal opposition for $5. I enjoyed our game of Blood Bowl. I listened to the event and enjoyed your speech, but I failed to find a single piece of advice from others that I can use. Like usual, my situation requires unique situations. The search for them continues. Oh, well, I'm sorry that we didn't have any usable solutions for you. It's kind of funny. I don't want to like dox us or anything, but I was like, my wife wasn't feeling well the night before, and I was like, honey, this is business. I'm just going up to do this talk and to meet with people that I do for my blog side hustle. And in the back, like I sneak up my Blood Bowl board. And so like after the VIP dinner, I snuck out, and my wife just went right to sleep. And I snuck out and went to this really weird coffee shop, and then we played the world's fastest game of Blood Bowl sevens. It was no bullshit. We roll the dice, we moved down the field, and we gloriously achieved a tie all within 45 minutes before my wife really realized that I was I'm mixing business and pleasure, so to speak. But it was a typical Portland thing. The entire venue was like an escape room or something. I don't know. Anyway, it was great meeting you. Yeah, I really admire your efforts to reinvent these nerd hobbies. We had an interesting conversation about what makes a good game and why the standard war games are very poorly suited, and how board games with miniatures, aka use something like a grid system or a tile system, are just so much more playable. I don't know, man. Like the problem with advice and situations is that we're all in different spaces in our life. The only consistent thing that we can say is useful is the act of networking itself. And so I think we have kind of. I mean, I probably should, um, build our relationship up, right? And there's a lot of other people I met there. Saw another entropy chat from one, and it's interesting, right? It's uh, yeah. I mean, look. I mean, your situation is your situation, and the advice just should be get people who are around you that can help you in that task. I think that is kind of the end point. But thanks so much for the Blood Bowl game, or the Sevens game. It was a lot of fun, and it was the first game I had played, I think, in all 2025. It's like I talk about that game more than I actually take the miniatures out and play it. Ben White for $3 USA. I never forget Dinesh D'Souza apostatized from the Catholic Church to be president at King's College, only to be ousted 2 years later for cheating on his wife. I cannot trust this guy. Yeah, I forgot that whole thing, right? Yeah, he ditched his wife, didn't he? And then that caused the collapse of his position at King's College. And all the while he was doing that, he was presenting himself as the face of Christianity against people like Christopher Hitchens. What a grifter. What can you be, please, can you just be genuinely yourself? This is the thing. I think that for people like Dinesh D'Souza, they've had to put on a mask for such a long time that there's almost no real person behind that. And so I think that a lot of people from foreign environments, they don't have the proper social environment to be authentic people, because everything incentivizes just brown nosing people until you can get into a position of power and then to take full advantage of that power. Asteroidal Assassin for $5 USA. The denouncement might just be these guys mistaking Twitter retardation for the entire dissident right. What they should be asking is that we stop talking about the irrelevant shit like Sydney Sweeney. Yeah, I mean, I had this whole podcast with Aaron McIntyre about chimping out. I am very anti-chimp energy. Look, I understand chimp energy works, but once you get to be even a little bit elite, and by a little bit elite, I mean, did you attend one of our events? Did you shake hands with people like Kevin Dolan and myself and the leaders of the OGC who were there? If you're doing that stuff, you're making more of an impact than retweeting memes online. You just are, because the whole point of online politics is to do real things in real life. And and there's no shortage of people who will just retweet memes online. There's thousands of people who, I don't need to be the king of the chimp army. I want people to develop themselves in real life. And, sure, Sydney Sweeney memes, I laughed at them. They were super funny. The whole longhouse millennial passive aggressiveness thing, it was so fun to see that finally smacked down in a real way. And it was delightful. But, it's all bullshit on Twitter. And now that there's no real discourse with the left, I don't know. It's just like Twitter's just this rage and anxiety machine. Whatever. It's fine. Gray Smog for $10 USA. What's your favorite color? I'm guessing red. Yeah, it's either red or green, I guess. I was always a fan of gray, red, and green. They're the ones. It's not. They don't really go well together. So maybe green and gray go well together. Maybe red and green go well together, but they look a little bit Christmassy. Maybe red and gray go well together. Who knows? But those are, I always never liked blue. I just never liked blue. I mean, it's kind of an interesting color, but it always felt cold. And I like things that are either luscious and natural, like organic, like green, or fiery, like red, or kind of ethereal, like the gray or white colors. You know, that always seemed to suit my personality more. Ben White for $3 USA. The woman voice you put on was gold. The e-girl grifter is the Christine Blasey Ford to the distant rights, Justice Kavanaugh, or something like that. Yeah, like Lauren Southern shows up and claims the entire dissident right raped her. That's what I'm expecting to come next. If history rhymes like it does, and we're in a cycle year to year, the next thing that needs to happen is that Lauren Southern needs to claim that the dissident right raped her. That fulfills the cycle, right? You have people denouncing the dissident right because of Twitter retardation, and then you have some hysterical woman who might be pregnant or getting off of a pregnancy is something to nuke her online personality by throwing out decades-long rape accusations that were never verified and never reported to the police after a whole career explaining why women, if you are raped or sexually assaulted, I need to have it reported to the police. I don't need to have it as part of my ideological political conversation 10 years after it happened. I'm sorry. Like the conversation on how we guide the future of humanity cannot come down to negative sexual experiences that you had a decade ago. That can't be how we determine the future of the human race. It just doesn't work. Cleta says $10 for your time. Thank you very much. My time is fleeting because I want to be done by 9:30. Ben White for $10 USA. The average white liberal thinks everyone is like them, but with darker skin and ethnic food. Well, yeah, except for conservatives, right? Everyone in the world is like them and agrees, except for conservatives. They do not understand how strong of an in-group preference many other groups like Indians have. Do they really think these groups will play nice with them once libs have nothing left to offer? Well, look, I don't really think they think much about the future. I think that they're going to be able to flee from it. I think that they think that libs believe that they will always be at the top of the white hierarchy, at the top of the Christian hierarchy. The Christian being broadly Christian, meaning apostatized, lapsed Christians, Christian atheists, and Christians. They will always be at the top of the Western hierarchy. Therefore, unless the West is completely destroyed, they never have to worry about in-group preference from out-groups because the bang for their buck is always to climb to the top of their in-group system. They don't think that, but that's essentially what they're doing. I don't really think that most liberals have good theories in mind for almost anybody. They certainly don't have very good theories in mind for conservatives. Ben White, in retrospect, whose position on the cigar bet between Aaron McIntyre and academic agent is right? At least in the corporate world, it really does feel like some woke has to be put away. Or maybe it's just the economy. Look, I've answered this question so many times. Will they put the woke away? It was always going to be both. It was always going to be both. The elite were going to try to put the woke away. The activist class was not. Okay, great. So the New York Times and Ezra Klein is putting the woke away. And then New York City just elected Mamdani. So does that mean if the New York Times puts woke away and New York elects what could only be described as a woke ID poll politician, is the woke put away or not? Well, it's both, right? Because while the left is ideologically all the same thing, anthropologically, they are not the same thing. There is the non-white left, there is the hard white left, and then there's the moderate white left. And while they're all the same thing in some kind of broad, ideological sense, they're anthropologically quite separated in terms of how they relate to each other and in terms of who they associate with. Okay, here we go. Aspiring misanthrope for $10 USA. Pretty much settled on don't start it, just grin and bear it when it comes to politics and the holidays. The in-laws are very on board. My family is more reluctant. That's exactly my situation. Well, I mean, I guess my in-laws and I argue all the time over Israel. Partly this is due to higher education. My dad might do so well having his BoomerCon soft lib worldview, and might not do so well having his BoomerCon soft lib worldview implode. Thoughts? God bless, Dave. Well, I mean, that's exactly my situation. My mother has a moderate soft lib boomer worldview. And like, I could argue her out of our positions in any one thing, but she still has to live in the world where liberal opinions are the de facto way that you gain social capital. You can't function in her world without having liberal points of view. They're everywhere. And so, I mean, the thing is like these people, they have to be converted as a class or not at all. Because you can get them to see what your point is. But they're kind of almost worried about seeing your point. They're kind of almost afraid that they might see your point, because if they see your point and it makes sense, then it will make it harder for them to go on in their own social lives. And if these people are in their 60s or 70s or 80s, they're not going to get a new social circle. What, are they going to be alone for the rest of their lives because they get excommunicated for having the wrong ideas? Ben White for $3 USA. I remember when at a meeting where Trump was talking to a group of AIPAC donors and made a comment like, I think Miriam Adelson might love Israel even more than America. You could hear a pin drop. I'm running out of my voice. Well, yeah. I guess so. I mean, I think that Miriam Adelson, I just don't want to get involved in horse racing the Trump administration. It's not my job to rein in Trump's State Department. It's not my job to to manage Trump's agenda in between him and the various people that he's put in his cabinet or in high power advisor positions. I can't do anything like that. So like I can observe, I can cheer it on like a sport, but it's not my job to be the general of an army of chimps. It's my job to create spaces for real human people, like in the Dune sense, and to cultivate a higher level of existence. Ben White for $3. Dave, I grew up around a lot of Jews. In fact, I think most of my friend group was Jewish. Green. Oh man, the groupers are going to have a field day with that clip. Haha. Well, I mean, it's true. It's true. I think a majority of my friends were Jewish. I mean, look, is it Jewish in the broadest sense? Most of them were atheists. Only a few of them were religious to the point where they were having Shabbat dinners. But, there were two or three of them that were, 2 or 3 families of bar mitzvahs and all that stuff. And it's a great culture. Again, I disagree with the religion. I mean, the Gruppers were already after me because they learned that I had a great grandfather or grandmother on my mother's side that was Jewish, making me like 3 or 4% Jewish. And they just had a field day with that. I mean, oh my God, the distributist exposed. It's just, it's kind of hilarious when you think about it in the context of the history of my family. But anyway, let's keep on going. Get him rock for $5 USA. Boomer cons like Dre here spent all day treating Islam as a monolith. But when Gen Z do it with a different false religion, all of a sudden they're bigots. Also, he should be canceled by our guys because in his limited time with fans, he's spent disavowing. Well, yeah, of course he did. I mean, but like, look, how are you going to cancel Rod Dreher, right? Rod Dreher is a gatekeeper. We can't lock him out. And what does he gatekeep? He gatekeeps fat donor money. The guy hasn't had an original idea in 7 years, and he's still kept afloat in a job, doing it full time. I do this blogging stuff on the back of a very time consuming career otherwise. But Dreher does this full time. So that's the gate he guards. We can't lock him out. He's on the side with the money. Mathis's mediocrity for $5 USA. I've come to nag you about the Halo post you made. Halo is based and ours. In response, I must now make a 2-hour video about the Christian and poetic influences of Halo has ranging from the Song of Roland to Dante's Inferno. This is your fault, Dave. Well, yeah, it is. And the great irony is that I praised Halo as being the greatest drunk game of all time. And I appreciate Halo in the same way that I appreciate Oktoberfest. You get a few beers in you. You get your buzz on. You sway back and forth. You start singing the German songs, and then you grab a plasma pistol and you pistol whip the guy, and win the match or take the flag or whatever. That's it. Hey, it's part of culture, right? That's the Shabbat dinner for the drunken millennial crowd. There you go, right? I don't know, man. I mean, Halo to me, the plot was never like I learned about Halo at the same time I learned about Warhammer because I had the Dawn of War game and I had the Halo game. And almost everyone who had played Warhammer and Halo knew that Warhammer was kind of the thicker, more emblematic game, and Halo was kind of the corporate product. Now, maybe there's a deep lore there. I don't know. But can't we appreciate it as good, dumb fun? I mean, Halo did not inspire me to reread Dante's Inferno, and I played a lot of Halo. Just saying. Shadowban for $5 USA. Speaking of adult teenager cartoons, did you ever watch Archer? I watched a few episodes of Archer. I absolutely hated the animation style. I remember the voice actor for Archer as being the guy who did Coach McGurk from Home Movies, which was another Adult Swim series that I really enjoyed. And because of that voice actor and the animation I really hated, I never got into it. Sam153 for $20. Cheers, Dave. AA is a lovable curmudgeon that does contrarianism once in a while to stir the pot. What do you plan to do with your $2,000 Trump bucks check? What are they panicking over that they're suggesting this terrible idea? The foreboding financial crisis? Well, maybe. I mean, the trouble is a brew in the economy, but that's all I can say right now. Ryan G for $50 USA. You're a light, Dave. Well, thank you very much. And let's just try to be there for each other in the community. And I'm not talking about the community of this channel. I'm talking about the community of the people who meet in real life. Meet and form relationships with people who are not suffering from excess Dunbar number people. That's I want to hang out with people, but it'll have to be a lot closer to where I live. I'll say that. Rotten Meat for $3 USA. Centrist personalities are always downstream of acts of authority. It's like a scar on the brain from having the ego being broken, I think you mean. Yes. Centrists is naturally all women want to be in the center of things. So in a democracy, the center position, in a democracy where women can vote, the center position is always the most comfortable. Except recently when women have been driven insane by the internet, in which case this kind of no longer applies. But yeah, I mean, most humans, most women, most humans follow authority, as they should. If human beings and if women did not follow authority, the species would die. No one can just no one can argue about everything all of the time. And so authority is a good and noble thing. It's like I always say about women, they can't perceive politics, they can only perceive religion, but that actually makes them kind of more accurate because politics is ultimately religion. But to do any practical politics in the real world, you have to assume that it's not religion. You have to be able to make friends with your religious enemies, at least within bounds of reason. Ben White for $5 USA. I can't believe we almost got an hour-long segment on Adventure Time. I came into adolescence around the time it came out, and I think it was highly influential with my cohort of older Zoomers and younger millennials. I pay for a video series on this. Yeah, I think Isaac Young did an essay series on Adventure Time, I think. I seem to remember him doing that. But really, I hate to break it to you. I think that there's only one really interesting absence in Adventure Time, and that is the absence of the arc where Finn accepts the burdens of adulthood and becomes a ruler and not an adventurer. That is Adventure Time ending. The time for Finn's adventuring has to end. That is the natural end of Adventure Time. But I guess I could rehash that thesis in an essay or something like that. It was like a video essay. Like I don't do many video essays anymore. I do essays on my Substack with the link in the description if you want to go see it. Awesome Time for $3. Adventure Times. Oh, one thing I should say. For the longest time, I used the Adventure Time tag Red Squirrel for. This was much more relevant from 2015 to 2021. After 2021, there were no more red squirrels. But a red squirrel, in my own meme internet speak, is somebody who watches your content just to hate it. And by watching your content just to hate it, has this deep, abiding hatred for you. And wants to destroy you personally, even though you have no idea who that person is, other than they want to kill you. I think the last and biggest red squirrel that I ever encountered was President Sunday. Red Squirrel comes from a character in Adventure Time, who a reader of Jake the Dog's blog, who then throughout the rest of the series is constantly trying to kill Jake, despite the fact that Jake doesn't remember the red squirrel's name, and neither do the viewers. It's kind of like and there's lots of jokes about I'm angry at you, but the other person can't remember your name. The Adventure Time sequel, Fiona Cake, is absolutely out of control. As you would expect, it's written by lesbians, guys, or feminists, same thing. Literally fan fiction written by lesbians. Oh, you got me there. In the new season, a female version of Finn gets a trans lesbian lover. Why would we ever grow up and become men when we could just move to an alternative universe where we're women and then get a trans lesbian lover? It just makes total sense. Anyway, thank you, Awesome Time. Iron Duke for $3 says, good stream, Dave. Thank you. I owe you a stream. I am way far behind, though. Ben White for $3. The problem with children cartoons is that children often age out of the demographic faster than adults will actually finish the storyline. I stopped watching TV entirely after a couple seasons. Well, I mean, that's the problem. I mean, the best thing to come from Cartoon Network was Over the Garden Wall, and that's because it was roughly as long as a long feature-length movie. And my kids love it, or my kid loves it. And my brother's kids love it. It's just fun for the entire family. Isaac Young for $10 USA. I recently made a quick Adventure Time post, and my goodness, the fandom is insufferable. Well, is it worse than the Halo fandom? No, I know you guys are cool. It's fine. I don't hate Halo. I love Halo, just not the way you do, in the words of Stan Marsh from South Park. Bro, don't you know that it's not a story about a boy and a dog? It's clearly fraternal. Bro, don't you know Jake is actually an alien? Bro, Simon isn't an archaeologist. He's an antiquarian. So they're nitpicking you, right? Well, I mean, it is fraternal, but I mean, so was the boy. A Boy and His Dog, the dark sci-fi movie from the 70s, was also fraternal in a very dark and twisted way. So I still think Jake is a dog, and initially Jake represents a mentor character for Finn, and towards the end of the series, Jake is kind of a someone who's holding Finn back from taking the next essential steps in maturity. Hey, society man, I met you at the event. I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to meet you at the after party and talk a little bit. I just got dinner and then had to immediately leave because my wife wasn't feeling particularly well, and I couldn't leave her high and dry. And to be quite honest, I was getting really tired too. I had been called in for my real job at 5 a.m. the next day. And so you're thinking like, I got 4 hours of sleep the previous night. I'm going to get 4 hours of sleep this night. So, I wish we could have talked more. Society Man says, seeing you and Thomas 777 speak opposite to one another on the panel was quite a trip. Yeah, I mean, Thomas 77 is quite a provocateur. We do not agree on everything, obviously, but he is quite a personality. My only advice is that if you're on a panel with Thomas 77, it's good to be the person that's directly before or directly after him. And that was on the opposite end of the table, because as soon as he's on a panel, he will completely dominate the frame of any space where he's given a microphone. That guy has presence like you wouldn't believe it. He has a very big presence in any space. He's definitely though somebody that men appreciate. Like, his humor is something that's appreciated way more by men than by women. And I think that a lot of wives didn't quite get the shtick. And I'm using that very ironically. They didn't get kind of the Thomas 77 shtick. I mean, I didn't initially either. I mean, it's kind of like, it's a Sam Hyde thing, right? But I don't think my wife gets Sam Hyde either. But anyway, Joy Empire for $5 USA. Sort of a niche personal thing I've been flirting with, but you do believe in a communal street block dinners could be feasible as a cultural norm? Tempted to try it at least as a Sunday thing, though unfortunately my street isn't very communal. Oh, like maybe in decades. But I mean, look, like baby steps here. Like, if you're not hosting dinner parties, you are not ready for regular block party meals. I knew there was a Muslim community in my hometown, and every week or every other week, they did a big communal dinner in the park. And it was a thing, right? We did a block party every year. But those things require thick communities. If you, like, for instance, the block I live on, it's very nice. Everyone's wonderful here. They're even kind of conservative. They are all in their 60s and 70s. The things that we have in common with them are very, very small, even though we're more or less ideologically aligned. You would really need to work to nail the dinner party thing. I don't know. Maybe, sometimes you just have to grasp the nettle. Sometimes harder things are easier than things that are apparently easy. So maybe the block party idea would just work. But in my opinion, you would need to have a few families that you were doing regular dinner parties with before you did the block party thing. I have totally lost my place. Here we are. Cool guy for $5. Hello, Dave. I've been watching and reading dissident right material for years now, and I feel like the dissident right just forgets its own canon like goldfish, or doesn't recognize its own positive spiritual power on the world as a collective. What are your thoughts? I mean, by canon, do you mean the books we read? I mean, I have the books on the shelves if you want to read them. We can go over Carlyle again. We can review Machiavelli's Discourses on Livy. We can overview Aristotle and de Juvenal and all that stuff. I mean, I could just talk your head off about the books we always talk about. I cite them all the time. Um, but I don't know. I mean, does that, I don't forget the canon. Uh, I mean, forgetting the problem is that the distant right is a catch-all label, and as such, it's just like the perfect whipping boy. No matter what you don't like, you can just blame the distant right. Like, why my microphone is echoing off the walls here? It's because of the distant right. You know why there's a glare on that picture behind me? Well, that's because of the distant right. I didn't have time to rearrange my room in a streaming friendly way because the distant right stopped me. Look, I mean, I think individuals have positive spiritual power. I think that the organizations we've developed, like Basket Weaving and the OGC, have positive spiritual power. I do not think, I don't know, I don't think internet labels have positive spiritual power. So by all means, let's do the New World Order Hulk Hogan heel turn. But, nobody in San Francisco is going to wake up tomorrow and think that you are a left winger, AA. Just, you got to be aware of that one, okay? I also tried to watch the recent debate between you and that brown leftist about Charlie Kirk. It was utterly unwatchable to me. 2 hours straight of the guy being disingenuous and pretending not to understand basic things. What's even the point anymore? Well, it's funny because the last 20 minutes of that debate was actually kind of useful when we talked about race and religion. So if you just talk about race and religion, then you can have productive conversations. But if you're stuck talking about what is a fascist, you will never make headway on that. Because abstract political concepts in a world where there is no moral alignment make no sense. They are totally incoherent artifacts. Nobody is using the same dictionary anymore. Nobody is using the same language anymore. And we're either at peace or at war. It's that simple. Isaac Young for $10 USA. I found myself in something of a gutter. I'm completely burned out on cultural commentary and writing essays regarding fiction. Feels there's something contemporary which really grabs me. Been trying to focus on fiction, but fiction is 10 times harder to market than an essay. Any advice? Well, I mean, you are absolutely, positively right about fiction being hard to market. I don't know how to market fiction. I've written some fiction too. I just don't have a market for it. I have no idea how to market fiction. Now, I mean, the problem is that fiction requires casual readers, and most casual readers are women. Now, there's a lot of distant right guys that are in the market, like myself, for short fiction. We've got a whole stack of books, and I would love to polish off a short story or a poem before I went to bed every night, written by one of my friends and great authors like you, Isaac. But I am not in the market for a large series. I know they're great. Everyone's praised the series to high heaven. It's just not where I am in my life right now. I don't know. Have you tried essay? I mean, essays do sell well. Essays do get clicks. Have you tried? This is gonna sound kind of crazy, Isaac, but I've had a good track record recommending crazy things to people and then telling me that they like they've liked the suggestions. There was a type of gonzo essay writing that was obviously everyone knows gonzo, right? So gonzo essay writing is where you report on a topic, but you write about it narratively. And the master of this was Hunter S. Thompson. A great example is was it the Bourbon Diaries or Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas? He writes about his experiences like a story. Now, one interesting thing about gonzo, so if you want to combine fiction and essay writing, you could copy the gonzo style. Now, there is a gonzo person writing on Substack from, I don't know if this guy's right wing. There's a guy called Walt Bismarck. He was famous for being an alt-writer back in the day. And, he writes gonzo fiction, and it's all about his sexual conquest, so it's a little less interesting to me. But if a daring writer could do the following, there was another gonzo writer called a radio personality back in the day. He died about 10 years ago, called Joe Frank. Joe Frank was this Jewish gentleman that had this wonderful, wonderful, wonderful ability to use words. He had this very thick, narratively satisfying voice that was incredibly large. I would have to drop my voice to a bass to approximate his power, his magnificence in voice. And he would talk like this throughout the entire radio show. And he would tell you stories about the various things that he did. So he would write a type of gonzo journalism where what he would do was he'd have a point to convey, some social commentary, and he would write in fictional things that happened to him in kind of a Hunter S. Thompson thing, but with totally fictional personal elements. And I've always wanted to experiment with a combination of fiction and nonfiction, where you start with a personal story about yourself that demonstrate a point, and then you humorously and surrealistically expand it into a ridiculous narrative circle, and then arrive back on your point. It would take a lot of balls to write something like that, but it would be kind of interesting. But maybe you could combine fiction and do just a standard gonzo journalist thing. That might be an interesting. I mean, look, I've heard Walt Bismarck is doing great with his Substack, so apparently you can write there is a market for gonzo essays. I don't know. Maybe the Walt Bismarck success is due to the fact that he really kind of does the red pill / gender slop thing, which sells great to young autists for some reason. But maybe it's also the gonzo essay writing. T.Y. Hewell for $10 USA. Great stream, Dave. Thanks for everything you do. D-Lock Yon Fawn from a Welsh man in England. Well, greetings, Welshmen. The last scion of the Celtic inhabitants of the British Isles. I don't know. Have I ever been to Wales? I don't know if I have. Probably at one point. I lived for a year in England when I was a kid, so I probably went to Wales once or twice. But I hear it's great, But thank you very much to Ty Hewell. Fido Doxte. I love this name. Fido Dogstoevsky. Dave, I recently moved and I want to be the party guy. The parties my in-law throw involve sitting around and small talk. I want lively birthday parties, fall festivals, spring gatherings. How can I be a good host and fulfill my desire to be a party guy? You came to the right place. Okay. I used to take pride in the fact that I could throw an excellent New Year's party. Okay, so, well, first of all, the components for a good party are this is going to be a long super chat. Man, I have a lot to say about this. You're going to get your money's worth here. But this is my components for running the perfect party, right? A party has to have a main meal, a main event, and a good icebreaker, and a gracious host. And hopefully multiple hosts. So you have to have at least one or two other people who are with you running the party. Wives are great for this. My wife is very introverted, but she's an excellent cook. So she's she's a very gracious host. So, but you have to have a partner in crime. It's very hard to run a party by yourself. If you are not a Mormon or not a Muslim, which I think is, or not some kind of weird Protestant sect, a party should have a drink. So I think that when you have a party, you invite people in and you immediately offer them a drink. Oh, I guess you could do this with non-alcohol, but if it's going to be a nice party, you have to have a drink that has a story behind it. So the drink that has a story behind it could be like, I'm making martinis today, or I'm making Cosmos. I'm making some kind of fancy drink. Do you want to have one? They're really good. You should really try one. Or alternatively, I just got this new vintage from Napa Valley. It's really interesting. Or, hey, I bought this weird juice from Trader Joe's. Like, have a beverage session that has something to it, something to talk about. That way, the first thing you do after you take their coat is you offer them a drink, and immediately you have an icebreaker. The second thing is, obviously the food, there has to be a food component. Do something that also try to get a story behind your foods too, if you possibly can. That really helps with parties. Um, the second thing is I'm a really big believer in party games. Now, there's basically only two party games that are uh that are good to play. There's only two. Uh, I've said there's many party games, but what I'm saying is every party game is like one of these two party games. The first party game is Celebrity. This is your classic icebreaker party game where you put the mystery person on your head or on your back, and you have to guess you have to guess what the name that's on your back or on your forehead or whatever. It's the simplest one, and it's one that everyone can play even if they're not drunk at all. And I'm not commending drunkenness, but once people have had one alcoholic beverage, they just act differently than before. Or once the ice has been broken, they also act differently than before. Then there is Exquisite Corpse. Exquisite Corpse can only be played after people are one drink in or after the ice has been thoroughly broken. Exquisite Corpse is a creative game. Pictionary would be an example of an Exquisite Corpse game, or Taboo would also be an example of an Exquisite Corpse game. It's a game of collaboration and collective creativity, and it always just brings down the house with laughter. Third thing is you always want to have like a joke. I've been trying to collect good jokes, and I've almost used all of my jokes at the various conferences I've been. I'm completely out of jokes at this stage. I have to recycle them now. But if you can be a guy who knows, like, memorize 10 or 20 jokes, or just write them down on a cue card and then read the cue card before, and then you'll have your jokes prepared. Telling a joke is a basic thing. So after the initial game icebreaker, your goal as host is to go around and make sure that nobody is sitting alone. Find the singletons and the doubles that look isolated, and then start chatting them up and then bring them into the group. Like, you're the sheepdog that's trying to make it so that everyone's mixing together. Then you have your food, which also has a story. Then you have a toast, and it's good to have don't make the toast a big deal, but I think it's really important to have a toast at any party. I think a party without a toast is like a man without a head, because the toast is what symbolizes the beginning of the party from the end of the party. Unless you want the end of the party to be characterized when people get too drunk, which is a bad idea. You shouldn't get drunk at parties. You should only get buzzed enough for Exquisite Corpse to be fun. Like that is the maximum amount of drunk you should ever be at an adult party, right? And then what you do is when people, after you give the toast, people will slowly start to leave, and it should be clear that after the toast, they've gone through the entire party, they've gotten the drink, they've gotten the joke, they've met at least one person, and they've eaten the main course, and they have gotten what they have from the party. And if you do those things, everyone will remember your party. The special drink, the special icebreaker, the special food, the joke, the person they met, the toast, and then the warm goodbye. That's your party in a nutshell. And if you nail all those 5 or 6 things, you will nail your party organization. In my humble opinion, obviously. Mathis Mediocrity says, off topic, but I remember an offhanded tweet you made about Final Fantasy Tactics. Given it had a slight boost in popularity from the new remaster, would you consider doing a segment or a video on it similar to your BioShock series? Yeah, back in the day I would. I love Final Fantasy Tactics. I tried to show it to my wife, and she was really into the plot, but her comment was, I feel like I'm watching Shakespeare, being performed by a bunch of Cabbage Patch dolls. And that is kind of the great criticism of Final Fantasy Tactics. It really is Shakespeare enacted by a bunch of Cabbage Patch dolls. But, there you go, right? Well, I mean, I'd love to do an essay on Final Fantasy Tactics. I would need to have something to say about it, but it isn't what everyone says about it. Final Fantasy Tactics is an example of something that I'd really rather be a movie than a video game. The game is all right, but every time there's a game that has such a deep plot as Final Fantasy Tactics, I want to show it to people. And I can't, my wife will never know the story of Final Fantasy Tactics because as a mother, she does not have 60 hours to get through like leveling up characters and getting through one of the most challenging video games of all time. All right, I'm at the end of my super chats. Thank you so much, guys. I will read now Psalm 11. I might do this by the day here. Okay, Psalm 11. And thank you so much for a wonderful live stream. I hope to see you next time for the Fiddler's Green podcast. And of course, this will be in podcast form on my blog, probably at the end of the week. I'm a little bit behind because of the conference. I have one that hasn't been uploaded yet, but now for the Psalm. Psalm 11. In the Lord I put my trust. How say ye, my soul? Flee as a bird to your mountain. For lo, the wicked bend their bow, they make ready their arrow upon the string, that they may privy shoot at the upright in heart. If the foundation be destroyed, what can the righteous do? The Lord in his holy temple, the Lord's throne is in his heavens. His eyes behold, his eyelids try the children of men. The Lord trieth the righteous, but the wicked and him that loveth violence his soul hateth. Upon the wicked he shall rain snares, fire and brimstone, and a horrible tempest. This shall be the portion of their cup. For the righteous Lord loveth righteousness. His countenance doth behold the upright. Thank you, everyone, for joining me for Fiddler's Green podcast number 64. What time is it? I will see you in 2 weeks.